In this meeting of the Brookline Board of Selectmen for tonight, April 7th, 2015, we have had and left our executive session. We're ready to proceed on to agenda item number 2, which is announcements and updates. And I know that Selectman DeWitt, in her usual fashion, has prepared some for us.
I have a few, and to be fair, they're kind of follow-ups on things that I mentioned last week. But specifically, this is Public Health Week. And there is an event scheduled tomorrow, which might be quite interesting. At 3:30 p.m. in Honeyman Hall at the main library, there is going to be a hands-on program to find out all you need to know about pickling and fermenting as food preservative. And I'm saying think sauerkraut. You could probably also think beer, too. For additional events around Public Health Week, go to the town website, and then there is a link to public health events that will be occurring this week and through the weekend. Also, ongoing, from April through June, Arts Book Brookline will be sponsoring a variety of events. There are many individual artists' exhibits at local galleries. I urge you to go to the www.artsbrookline.org website to have a complete listing. But tomorrow at 6:30 p.m., there will be a live musical performance, apparently vocals and instruments, at the Waterworks Museum, which is at 2450 Beacon Street, across from the Chestnut Hill Reservoir. And other events are coming up, and that would include the things that we normally anticipate, which is the open studios, and then later in June, the Coolidge Corner Arts Festival. On Sunday, April 12th, at Cypress Field, men are invited to walk a mile in her shoes, which are red heels, in a serious effort to end sexual assault and gender-based violence. Proceeds from the event will benefit the Jennifer Lynch Committee Against Domestic Violence. And for more information, you go to www.inhershoesbrookline.weebly.com. And finally, the deadline to register to vote in the May 5th town election is April 15th, next week. It's also, for those people who are worrying about it, the deadline for filing U.S. income tax returns. And finally, I would like to mention that the League of Women Voters tomorrow night is sponsoring an override forum representing both pros and cons. Wednesday night, it will be in this room, the Selectmen's Hearing Room, Town Hall, 6th floor, from 7 until 9 p.m., and sponsored by the League of Women Voters, which means that it will be a very informative session, I'm sure. And that's it.
Good. Anything else?
I want to congratulate our chair for Monday morning, I believe. He was recognized for his commitment to veterans in the town of Brookline. And,
Yes.
I know that's something close to his heart, so I want to publicly congratulate him and thank him for his dedication to the cause.
Thank you, Selectman Franco. And but I want to also just mention that I was very pleased to have our first honorary flag raising
yes.
for a veteran. In this case, William McCarthy, who gave so much to this country and to this town. And Monday's morning was really about him. I was sort of happy from my point of view afterthought.
Yeah, we were actually given a tour of the new room downstairs at the Veterans Center that I believe Selectman Goldstein was instrumental in helping them get that straightened out. It was very nice. And I think one of the really wonderful things that's going on at the Veterans Center now is that some of the younger veterans, many of whom are coming back with PTSD and that sort of thing, so they're forming some support groups among themselves for some of the younger veterans. So it's I think it's given new life, and I'm sure the new room helps with that sort of private area for people to get together.
And let me mention by name, though, Commander Elman Hendrickson. He's the new blood and the new life at the Veterans Post. He's come in, and that was his project. And moral support, Brookline Rotary gave him some support, but Elman is really the person who's physically and in theory been behind the regeneration and the renewal of the Veterans Post. Anything else?
I also want to add that as Selectman DeWitt said, that if you can't attend which I'm sure it'll be very humorous, but if you can't attend the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event, please do go online and contribute. I think they're asking people to contribute $15 each to the Jennifer Lynch Fund, which is to work on issues of domestic violence
And particularly
education.
provide counseling to victims of domestic violence as well.
So it's
important.
even
Very
if
important.
you can't be there or you're, you're tied up this weekend, please think about contributing to that.
Okay. Thank you. If there's nothing else, I'll go on and say that there's nobody signed up for public comments, so we'll move right to our miscellaneous calendar. And the first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our March 31st meeting. I had no corrections or edits.
I had some edits.
And so I therefore move that we approve the minutes as amended by Selectman Waschinsky and Selectman Franco. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. Moving on to the next item, which is the question of approving and executing the following contracts with HMFH Architects for feasibility and schematic design in connection with the Devotion School project. Amendment number 4 for $74,250 for additional geotechnical and geoenvironmental work, and amendment number 5 in the amount of $16,755 for pre-construction consulting services.
I'm trying to
Mr.
see what Mr. Quigley's
Mr.
tie
Quigley.
is. This time it's certainly,
Well, it's basketballs, it should be
oh,
baseballs.
basketball.
It should be-
Oh,
yeah.
okay. I thought pumpkins, and I thought you'd gotten
Yeah, no,
confused.
little
but-
basketballs on it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of late with that, too. so. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Quigley.
This is contract amendment number 4 in the amount of $74,250. It's for additional geotechnical and geoenvironmental and services, mostly into 4 different categories. One is the Phase 1 initial site investigation tier characterization for reporting required by the DEP associated with the reportable concentrations of petroleum hydrocarbons in the vicinity of the underground oil storage tank. The next item is the balance of the soil pre-characterization of material that would be associated with the building construction. Again, this is DEP regulation for pre-characterization of soil that is planned to be excavated and removed from the site as a result of the building construction. The fourth item is ground penetrating radar and electromagnetic survey and subsurface exploration program to assess the potential presence of steel and/or concrete from previously demolished structures on the site. Final item of this particular contract amendment is soil pre-characterization of material on the site that is expected to be generated in connection with the site work, such as play fields, ramp structures, stormwater retention systems. That's the contract amendment number 4 items. Would you like me to go into number 5 briefly, or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Amendment number 5 to the contract, the amount of $16,775, is for pre-construction services to include an evaluation of constructability of design, site logistics, phase construction and occupancy, schedule review, and an opinion on the increment of phased occupied construction versus unphased unoccupied work. The idea here is to get another set of eyes to look at many of the assumptions that have been made regarding the progress, the project to date with respect to issues of phasing, building, site logistics, safety, schedule, and cost.
Okay. Are either of these amendments a surprise, or both of these things that we anticipated would need to be done?
Well, certainly the geotechnical, geoenvironmental one is things that need to be done. And this has come up quite a bit with the Building Commission. and the consultants and discussions. The commission is very interested in making sure that we do as much site investigation that makes sense to evaluate conditions, to eliminate surprises to the best extent possible.
Selectman Daley probably would
I was just
remind
gonna
everybody
say,
about
we
Runkle.
kept running into unpleasant surprises on the Runkle site.
Yeah,
Because there
and-
had actually been a school there prior to the current school, and we kept hitting, we'd hit the boiler room and discover there was oil in there. And I kept telling Tony, we've found everything else, if we could only find some gold on the site, it would have been helpful.
Or at least, in the case, I believe, there was one sort of intact former, I've forgotten what it was, a clock or something. At least if it were discovered intact, it would be an antique worth selling for a lot of money, right?
So,
Anyway.
I mean, in fairness, we did quite a bit of work up there too, and, unless you really, you can do a lot of this, and it doesn't eliminate 100% surprises. It just isn't, because until you really get in there, and unless you had a way of.
Can I just, probably people don't understand this, Devotion, like Runkle, had a former school on the site, so there have been, what's the core that's still standing is 1913, but there was another 1916 building that was demolished, and then a later 1928 building that was demolished, a wing added in 1955, and another wing added 1974-75, and all of those are pre-environmental review conditions that we are subject to today. And so this is really trying very diligently to be sure there are no unanticipated, there are no surprises really on the site. And I believe there was a fire station in part of it at one point.
Yeah,
and
where the field's going to be,
yeah, right,
as far
so,
as we know.
anyway. Learning from Runkle in part?
Yes.
Now, the second part, Tony, so that is more of something that wasn't anticipated.
No, it wasn't, it wasn't particularly anticipated, but the thought was, as we put together the schematic design, to have another set of eyes look at a lot of the assumptions we made, to make sure that we're trying to capture the real scope and cost of the work as we submit this to the town and the voters and the MSBA. So I think it's a very useful thing that was supported by the building commission as well.
And I'm sorry about
No, go ahead.
speaking again, but we do plan, actually, Mr. Conley, the principal at Devotion, will be here next week, assuming that we continue with the schedule that we've proposed, and we'll give everybody an update on the status of the project. And one of the things that I've become very aware of as we've gone through the discussions around this presentation is how long the project has been in development, and that we committed to the amount that's in the override at a very early stage in the project, which is to say, it's not a bad thing, it's just important to understand that it was at a preliminary state of the design. And so it wasn't, it did not incorporate much of the, what's called development, which is to say, just to be blunt, how many classrooms and where they will physically be located. When the schematic, or the, what's called preferred option, was first accepted, we knew how many classrooms. We didn't exactly know where they physically would be located. And so those are things that are constantly evolving. And therefore, good review at a regular interval is important.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Just,
Selectman Waschinsky.
With these amendments, are we still within budget for this phase of the,
Yes,
so,
we're still lower than the current appropriation.
okay.
All right. Very good. If there's no further discussion, I'm going to move that we approve and execute the following contracts with HMFH Architects for feasibility and design in connection with the Edward Devotion School Project, Amendment Number 4, in the amount of $74,250, and Amendment Number 5 in the amount of $16,755 in the manner that's presented to us by Mr. Quigley. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I vote aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miscellaneous item C is the question of approving and executing a contract in connection with the Baker School Modular Project in the amount of $387,760 with Vanguard Modular Building Systems of Malvern, Pennsylvania. Mr. Masak.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This was at the request of the school department. There are no cost-effective spaces within the building to carve up anymore. They were looking at the library and other spaces such as that. And then it was thought, well, let's look at modulars. So we put it out to bid or request for proposals. It's a two-part process. We looked at the qualification of each bidder, and then we open up the costs, and the most cost-effective solution was Vanguard Modulars.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I have a couple questions about this, Ray. So this works out, it's 2 classrooms, right?
Yes,
So it works out very close to $200,000 per modular unit.
yes.
And it says in here that we're moving forward with a lease purchase arrangement, and assuming that these will have no value at the end of 5 years?
Yeah, after 5 years, whether you lease or purchase, they have no value. So we're moving forward with the purchase. So if it goes beyond...
No value from like a tax point of view or something like that?
No value to the lease, no value to the modular company. So after 5 years,
Okay,
it's better to purchase. And
Okay.
that's what the modular folks
Okay.
have told us.
but I'm just, $200,000 per room seems like a lot to me if we're throwing them away at 5 years. But them having no sort of monetary value to the company,
It has
at-
monetary value to us.
so they're still usable for more than 5 years?
Correct. So when we have...
If we need
we're
them for
hopeful
something.
we'll have a permanent solution.
Yeah,
We'll then be able to move, they'll be ours,
Mm-hmm.
and they might be the contractor's construction trailers.
yeah,
Or
or
we may
I'm
move
just
them
wondering
somewhere
with all
else
of our
instead.
preschool needs, if, we might want to move them someplace and put preschoolers in them. But you're saying we would be able to continue using them at the end of that time?
Yes, I am. I
Okay.
am saying, I'm saying no value from a cost standpoint, but
Okay.
if there's a value as a usable space.
Okay. And when we build like if we were to build 2 new classrooms, in not modular, but brick and mortar type things, what's the cost to that?
I think it's like 60%. I think there's a 60% save, 40% savings from, I
To-
haven't looked at that.
To do the modulars?
Correct.
Okay.
Selectman Franco?
I have 2 questions for you, Ray. One, this isn't the same company that we use for the Lawrence School sort of modular classrooms. It's a sort of a new entity.
No, we've tried bidding this before, and in speaking with the modular folks, the simpler the better, so I personally put together the bid documents, and that's why we got a very favorable response.
But it's a different company than...
That it
okay.
is.
And then my second question is, talk to me a little bit about potential disruptions for students at the Baker School through the installation of this.
It'll be minimal. Right now, we're planning on doing the foundations based on your folks' approval in the April vacation. And then, because of the snow days, I forgot the date, June 29th, I think, they'll come during the summer and install foundations during the vacation, and then in the summer, the rest of the installation. So it'll be very, if any, none.
So, okay, so no work, or no significant work while students are at the Baker School. It's going to take place entirely when they're either on summer vacation or April
We've
vacation.
anticipated that, but as we get closer to June, and we'll see how the schedule goes, we have been working very closely with the principal.
Are these going to be physically attached to the existing buildings? Well, will you have to go outside to,
Yes, they have to be
To
physically
enter.
attached. This way, we have no bathrooms, and because they're physically attached, we then don't need plumbing, which would have added to the cost. So we were trying to keep the costs down.
so isn't there some renovation, alteration of the existing structure that has to be done in order to accommodate the passageway between the two?
Well, it's minimal.
Yeah.
I think we're going to be taking the doors down We have to add fire protection, add a pipe into the existing fire protection system. We have to add a module for fire alarm, as well as power. So we do go into the facility, but we tried to keep the disruption to the facility to a minimum.
Should we be expecting a contract for that part of the job, or is that included in this
That's all
contract?
included as part
Or
of
we can do it
this.
in-house?
It's 2 modules and the connector, fully enclosed connector with heat within that connector.
I see. Good.
So when you say modular, is this portables, or is this, it's built for us in a factory, and it's in effect permanent construction?
It's more permanent.
Okay.
Modulars has a very bad connotation.
Yeah, I built a
to it.
modular house, so
It's gonna look a little bit better, but it is permanent construction. We bid it new or used. The used bid was actually twice than the new, so we're actually getting new trailers being manufactured as we speak. They took a risk based on, I told them when we could get the signing by the selectmen, and they go, well, we're gonna put it into production pending. So they took a risk, knowing full well we hadn't signed the agreement. So we
Okay,
can meet your schedule.
anything
All right.
further?
So this sounds like a couple of double wides, is that what we're putting out there?
well,
Yes.
Nicer than that.
yeah, if it's modular, like when I built my modular home, it's not double wides, it's a real house. It's a permanent house, and it's just a method of construction.
It's 3 trailers per
I was gonna say,
classroom, so.
It requires special handling to move it around, though, right?
Yes, that's a very good question and concern, yes. And that is our concern, is getting the mod.
From Pennsylvania.
To Pennsylvania, and then getting it out back where we're
Right.
proposing at the Baker School.
Right, and they have to map out a route and then make sure that there are no obstructions and,
We might be cutting a couple tree branches and moving a couple benches, yes.
in town or in Boston or,
Oh, right at the school.
okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to move that we approve and execute a contract in connection with the Baker School modulars in the amount of $760.30, based on 5 yearly payments with Vanguard Modular Building Systems of Malvern, Pennsylvania. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Next is miscellaneous item D. It's the question of approving and executing a memorandum of agreement with Motivate International, Inc., allowing the continuation of the town's hubway operator. And Mr. Viola.
Good evening. Joe Viola, Assistant Director for Community Planning. With regard to the agenda item, it's hard to believe we're going the town's 4th year as a participant in the Hubway Bicycle Share System. For those of you who were on the board in 2012, when we executed our initial contract, you may remember that it had a 3-year term. That contract is actually lapsed as of March 28th, and we are now looking to extend that contract by 1 year. The system is gearing up for operations. Could be as soon as this week that stations will be ready for delivery for the town. The memo of agreement essentially serves as a 1-year contract extension under the existing conditions of the current contract. Hopefully in my cover letter and in the MOA itself, it's pretty clear that we're intending to extend for 1 year, and the MOA will allow Alta, well, I should say now Motivate, used to be Alta, to continue as our operator as we continue to participate in Hubway. That's why I'm here tonight, to ask the board to approve and execute the MOA so that we can have Motivate on board in time for the start of the upcoming season.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, wasn't at one point the city of Boston was having some issues with Alta? Did that get worked out? Are we all going to still be on the same system or not?
Oh, yeah. We're all in the same system. There was, we did a procurement, and we participated on the team doing the procurement to have a new, a different kind of model. and it was the same vendor who won the contract. So we had a choice for this year. Do we participate in that contract structure, or do we continue with the existing contract structure?
Correct.
And you did a
We
cost
did.
benefit?
Our analysis shows that there's not really that much of a cost savings in entering into the new contract. And given that Alta, the operator, has now been purchased by a larger company and maybe looking to change the way we operate in Boston and Greater Boston, we thought it made sense to continue under the existing contract and basically to see what happens now that Motivate is on board and to hear what they have to say about changing the way Hubway operates.
Okay, Selectman Waschinsky.
Yeah, I'll just mention to the board that, as you recall, we've convened a Hubway Advisory Committee. The committee met for the first time last week, and some interesting ideas came out of that meeting that we're going to be looking at. We're hopefully going to engage with Motivate to look at, are there opportunities to expand? Does our financial model support that? And that's perhaps questionable. And maybe there are other models we can look at, but that's a work in progress.
We hope to report back to the board. I know the charge of Selectman Waschinsky's committee is to report back to the board at some point with some recommendations, so more to come on that.
Just a sort of a follow-up, and it may be Selectman Waschinsky or Mr. Viola, I don't know who's going to answer, but as I recall, we are sort of in a partnership with Cambridge, Somerville, and Boston, is that right? Are there other communities?
Yes, it's still the same 4 communities.
Okay.
And we're all governed by a regional MOA that talks about how we all interact and how decisions are made. So you're correct.
So it will, in the end, be us presumably working with the other 3 communities rather than sort of becoming detached, if that's the right way to put it.
The only way this thing can work
Yeah.
is as a regional system. That said, each municipality owns the stations and owns the bikes assigned to the stations, though there's, of course, interoperability. You can pick up a bike in Brookline, ride it to Boston, and vice versa. That said, again, each of the municipalities has a different interest. We participate, we have different sizes, so, Boston has 100-something stations, we have 4, and Cambridge has, what?
30-something, I believe.
30-something. So, we are the small player in this system. Yet, while we're a very small player, we've actually had a pretty big role in a lot of the internal operations and decisions. I participated on the evaluation panel for the contract rebid. So we had, 25% of the seats at the table, yet we have 4% or 3% of the stations. So, we're holding our own in terms of representation. Financially, we're a very small piece of the puzzle, and we're a small player.
I hope we become a larger player. I know that there's been some discussions and some visioning sessions that have taken place where the idea of sort of engaging in a partnership between maybe some private interests in town, some of our colleges and universities, to add additional stations and expand our inventory of Hubway bicycles.
Right,
has
and those
been
are
done.
some of the things the committee will be exploring, along with potentially other models that we could perhaps propose to Motivate. So, we'll
And
see.
other funding streams potentially to help us to continue to operate as well.
Right, so, we are running a cash flow deficit, which is covered by some grants, which are drying up. So, we've got about another year's worth of money in the kitty.
Right.
this is just the contract extension for the operations. There's other contracts in place for the payment system and
That's all
maintenance.
part of
It's all
this.
part of this, okay.
Okay. Well, until we see what the next generation or next evolution of the hubway system is, makes perfect sense to extend this for another year on the same terms. So I therefore move that we approve and execute a memorandum of agreement with Motivate International, Inc., allowing Motivate to continue as the town's hubway operator, subject to the terms and conditions of the original agreement executed on March 28, 2012, for an additional term of 1 year. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I vote aye.
Thank you.
Next, we have the question of accepting a grant in the amount of $144,029 from the Mass DOT for roadway repairs as a result of our unusually harsh winter. So this is good news. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Ditto.
Yes, well, winter's finally over.
Oh, ho!
Now you've cursed us.
Now it's time to roll up our sleeves and fix our roads. That being said, the state
We're
has,
supposed to maybe potentially see a few flakes tomorrow, Mr. Ditto.
it's not going to happen. The state is giving us $144,029 to do some pothole repair work. If this number looks familiar, it should. It's exactly the same number that we got last year.
But it will fill fewer potholes.
Not many. The inflation hasn't really
Okay.
hit too bad yet. This program has to be, the construction has to be completed by June 30th, and the final invoice has to be in the state's hands by July 31st. I estimate it'll take us about 3 weeks to complete this work, and I anticipate starting also at the end of April this month.
And we're doing this in-house with our own equipment? or
No, we're actually contracting this out.
Okay.
The bids,
Question?
the bid for that will be opened up this last week in April. We'll award the contract and start the first week in May.
I see.
Well, there's certainly a lot of potholes around town. so-
Yeah, so my question actually is, what's the assessment? Are we in much, incrementally much worse shape than this time last year? A little worse shape? What?
I think this is the worst winter I can remember. The streets are awful.
They
We
really
can't,
are, yeah.
I don't remember anything being this bad.
So this is just a drop in the bucket
It is a drop in the bucket.
to what we actually need to
Right.
address this.
But
But it helps, it helps. Everything
the
helps.
contract has to be tied to this grant? We can't supplement it with other,
We will.
we would have been doing repairs anyway, right?
Yes, we're putting out 2 maintenance contracts.
Uh-huh.
One with the town funds and one specific to state funds.
I see, okay.
So on the way over here today, we got those potholes filled again at the bridge over the T on Sumner today.
Yeah,
They
that
were,
was
those were,
something.
I was afraid of falling through to the T tracks a couple times. It was pretty big.
Speaking of that, while we have Mr. Ditto here, I wonder, I know water and sewer isn't your area, but is the problem at the bridge on Cypress, is that actually taken care of now, once and for all?
Not yet. We're still analyzing what method we want to use to repair that pipe. And right now, we're looking at doing a epoxy liner in place, because we really don't want to have to shut the T down, go underneath, take the pipe out and replace it. So there are about 2 or 3 companies that do that type of work specific to water mains. You might remember that we do a lot of plastic lining of pipes on the sewer and drain side of things, but we've never really done anything like that with ductile iron water mains. So we're looking at how we're going to take care of that, and we think we have a solution where we can actually access it from both sides of the bridge and just pull a epoxy liner through it, let it set up overnight, and then hopefully turn the valve on with no leaks.
Okay. there's no further comment or question, I move that we accept a grant in the amount of $144,029 from the Mass DOT for roadway repairs required as a result of the unusual weather this winter. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Thank you. Thank you. Miscellaneous item F is the question of approving and executing a lease purchase agreement with TD Bank in the amount of $69,849.30 for equipment to be used by the Recreation Department for the Robert Lynch Golf Course. Ms. Paradis.
Hi, yes. Just what it says. We are in the end of our 5-year contract with our previous lease with Toro for large equipment to be used on the golf course for maintenance and upkeep and greens work. And we're entering into a new contract. TD Bank is the best option for this lease. And this will be used, it's a 5-year lease, and we do have a purchase agreement with them at the end. It's a dollar buyout at the end for each one of the pieces of equipment.
So Lisa, are we purchasing the equipment from the expiring lease? Or?
Yes, we did as well.
So we're
Yes.
going to have too much equipment now? or-
No, we will
Okay.
not. We will still not have probably enough to do what we want to do. We're trying to play catch-up, actually, after many years of not having any equipment, so,
Okay.
yeah. We just hope to be able to use it, actually, sometime this year.
Yeah.
If it dries out enough.
Any questions, comments?
I will admit that I glanced through this without looking at the level of detail I would have liked to, but I could not find somewhere that I could comprehend the, I would say, interest rate purchase cost.
It's on page F11,
Thank you.
computation of yield, 1.77%.
And I have to also say that Mr. Janakakis from the purchasing division got us a great rate for that, actually saved us quite a bit of money from our
Oh,
previous
okay,
lease.
now I found it,
Yes.
right. I obviously didn't understand what computation of yield meant. Anyway.
Speaking of Mr. Janakakis, you just walked.
There he is.
I'm curious to know if we took a look at seeing if this was a service or equipment we could borrow from our Parks and Open Space Division, or are we in such a shortfall with equipment that there's no choice but to get this additional equipment?
Yeah, I mean, really, we've been actually doing this for many years, and the 7 that I've been here, it works out quite well. It's not only is it different kind of equipment, golf course equipment is actually quite individualized to golf courses. The use of the look of the tires and the weight of the equipment is very different than your normal backhoe, let's say, or any other equipment. So it is pretty specific to golf courses for the most part. But the other factor is that the Parks Department uses their equipment at the same time we would be. So while we do at times use some equipment like wood chippers and things like that, it's very few and far between.
This is coming out of the enterprise fund?
Correct,
Is it?
yes, everything does for the golf
Okay.
course, yes.
So this is worked into the budget, and
Yes.
as we know, the golf course has been meeting its budgetary enterprise requirements, and in fact, paying a little something extra to the town every year to boot, so. If there's no further questions or comments, I move that we approve and execute a lease purchase agreement with TD Bank in the amount of $69,849.30 for equipment to be used by the Recreation Department for the Robert Lynch Golf Course. It's set for a period of 5 years, right?
Yes.
For 5 years. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I'll also vote aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is the question of executing and extending the Walnut Hill Cemetery caretaker occupancy agreement at 96 Grove Street for an additional 3-year term. Ms. Galantine?
Good evening.
Good evening.
We are looking to have the board renew the caretaker agreement for 96 Grove Street. This is a unique agreement that we have with the town where we have a cemetery caretaker that resides at the split home and office that is at the entrance to the Walnut Hills Cemetery. As you can see in your packet, there are a host of duties that are assigned to the caretaker, and it is incredibly helpful to the town in terms of having someone on hand that can open and close the gate on the weekends. As you go through the year and you're into the summer months, we'll close the gate at dusk, and is generally there if someone needs, they have questions. Often it's, how to get to one section or another of the cemetery, but really just to provide a presence. And we have heard from many individuals how reassured they feel knowing that Mr. McDermott is on the property and vigilant about kind of who's coming and going, and he's really served us very well. So we've had a great last 3 years with him in this role, and we are looking to continue that for another 3.
Good.
And I'd just like to add that I've heard from Brookline residents how responsive he has been, either with, I know during the winter, there was some damage that happened in various places, and he's been right on top of things, and also just in general, helping them find stuff that is there, but nobody could figure out exactly where there was. So at many different levels, he's been very responsive, and I just have heard nothing but good about him.
Agreed.
I'll add that I can't believe it's been 3 years already.
Yeah.
Seems like yesterday we executed the first version of this. Any further question or
See how
comment?
time flies when you're having fun?
It does. I move that we execute and extend the Walnut Hill Cemetery caretaker and occupancy agreement at 96 Grove Street for an additional 3-year term. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
I vote aye. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Next miscellaneous item H is the question of accepting a grant in the amount of $1,000 from the Brookline Community Foundation for the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event. Mr. Gelano, I suspect this is you.
Good evening. As folks are probably aware, we're actually having a walk this Sunday, April 12th, at 1 o'clock. We have at least 50 people have signed up. I call it the legal way, and we have another 30 probably are going to come and show up and walk with us. Yeah, we're really excited about the event, and we're going to have a raffle for Red Sox tickets too. So, and lots of information about domestic violence and gender abuse will be presented too. So, we also have former Selectman Bobby Allen, who is actually going to be the MC. So we're really looking forward to that. I don't know what we're going to get out of that, but I hear he's an excellent speaker and kind of a comic as well. So we'll get to see that. The reason why I'm here tonight, Brookline Community Foundation has generously gave us $1,000 to go towards this event, and we're here tonight to ask the Board of Selectmen to accept this grant.
What are the expenses in connection with the event?
Well, this year we spent over $7,000, and that's the startup cost. $3,000 of that went to purchasing the shoes that we can use annually. Some costs for T-shirts, banners, some of the information that'll be hung up on the fences, and food, water, and et cetera.
And where did the rest of the funds come from?
I'm sorry.
The rest of the funds?
Part of it came from my office. Another part actually came up from the BAA fund, which was like $3,000.
Okay. Questions? All right. Well, I move that we accept a grant in the amount of $1,000 from the Brookline Community Foundation for the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
I'll vote aye.
And I wish you good weather.
Oh, thank you.
And may your spike heels not get broken.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I should, a little bit of a change. The distributor for our shoes didn't have the extra long stilettos this year, so we had modified versions of it. I guess you would call them pumps, between pumps and stilettos. I don't know the technical. But that, But I think we're walking with less harm, put this way.
Well, I would have thought, Mr. Gelano, that we would, Dr. Gelano, that we would not want to have broken ankles as a result of this
No,
Yeah,
no.
well-intentioned
I
event.
saw some of them, and I thought those heels were pretty darn high.
That's
so-
what I thought about the samples that were.
Yeah.
Yeah, the samples are different, so. And just one thing, I was looked at the weather this morning. We're supposed to have slightly overcast skies, no rain, and 60 degrees. I think that's ideal.
Yeah, the
So-
60 degrees sounds really good.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. We have some temporary alcoholic beverage licenses, which I'm going to move as an omnibus fashion. So these are items I and J in our miscellaneous calendar. So I move that we grant a temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Lincoln School PTO in connection with Trivia Night to be held on April 11th, 2015, from 6 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. at 19 Kennard Road. I move that we grant temporary liquor licenses to Pine Manor College in connection with the following events to take place at 400 Heath Street. An all kinds alcoholic beverage temporary license for a wedding on May 23rd, 2015, from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., and wine and malt beverages for a bar mitzvah on May 20th, 2015, from 12:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m., a graduation party, a graduation on June 18th, 2015, from 6:30 p.m. to 10 p.m., and a bar mitzvah on June 20th, 2015, from 12 noon to 4 p.m. All in favor of those temporary alcoholic beverage licenses, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. That concludes our miscellaneous calendar. We're on to our regular calendar. And the first item is number 6 on our agenda. It's the question of authorizing the filling of a vacancy in the position of Assistant Library Director for Technology in the Library Department. Ms. Slyman.
Hi, good evening. Sarah Slyman, Library
Good evening.
Director. Here tonight, we have a vacancy in an essential position. One of the 2 assistant directors at the library, the assistant director for technology, has resigned. And it's a position I really have a difficult time living without, even just for these last 7 days. So I would like to ask you to authorize me to fill that as soon as possible.
Good. Any questions from Ms. Slyman? No? I don't want to deny you one that you can't live without, that's for
Thank
sure.
you.
So you've heard me tell you about this in the past, but I'm going to remind you that we seek as diverse a pool of town employees as possible, and as a result, we want you to cast your net far and wide in seeking applicants for this position. Please consult with Dr. Gelano, who you saw here a moment ago, and with our Human Resources Director, Sandra DeBoe, to make sure that we're doing everything possible in that regard.
I sent a list of over 20 places already, including the Black Librarians Caucus and the Chinese American Librarian Association.
Excellent.
So we should look forward to seeing, I hope, a diverse and highly qualified pool of candidates
That's what we
soon.
like to hear. That's great. Good job, Sarah.
Thanks.
All in favor of authorizing the, turn the page too quickly here, authorizing the filling of a vacancy in the position of Assistant Library Director for Technology in the Library Department, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I also vote aye.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Agenda item 7 is the question of temporarily amending the Police Department Table of Organization by 1 sergeant position. So I'll let the chief explain exactly what you want to do here.
Okay, yes, thank you, good evening. We have the time to make several promotions within the police department, and I'd just like to take a minute to explain them for them. At the end of this month, the end of April, we have one of our deputy superintendents, Tom Keaveney, retiring from the department, and the retirement is effective April 30th of this month. In order to fill that position, we would have to select the next deputy superintendent from the rank of lieutenant, which will cause a vacancy in the lieutenant's rank as of the same date. And further on down the line, it's also a vacancy. To fill the lieutenant, we have to grab a sergeant. So there'll be a vacancy in the sergeant's rank. So the first 3, those will account for the first 3 positions that I'd like to fill. The 4th position, Sergeant Robert Murphy, who has been with us for 32 years, has filed his retirement paperwork, and that's effective on April 20th of this year. So it's another week and a half, and he'll be retired. The third one is we have another longtime sergeant, Sergeant William Riley, who is out on a medical disability, and it's been verified by doctors that he'll be unable to return to work. In mid-February, I signed his retirement papers. The problem with that is his position has been vacant. It's a detective sergeant's position. It's been vacant since mid-December. It looks like by the time he gets through the retirement board, we won't see his retirement officially until sometime in September. So in the interim, I'm asking that we temporarily expand the table of organization by one sergeant. We fill it from the current list, and I've already checked with Melissa and with our budget manager. We do have the money in our budget to cover the next week's, whatever weeks it's going to take to carry this extra sergeant. And at the time that Sergeant Riley, William Riley's retirement becomes official, we just go back to our original allotment of 16 sergeants. So it'll be a temporary expansion by one, probably between, the end of April or beginning of May until sometime at the end of the summer, when the retirement is effective. That will allow us to become fully staffed in our supervisory ranks.
So Robert Murphy and I are the same age. If he's retiring, I think I should be able to retire too.
Yeah, I think April 20th is his birthday. He turns 55 and 30, I think it's 55, don't quote me on that. Yes, he's retiring.
I think it's 56.
In the ballpark.
He started a couple of years ahead of you. So
I was going to say, how many years would you have to be a selectman in order to?
All I know is we went to kindergarten through forever together, so. Any questions for the chief? I think I get the general idea here. Selectman Daley?
Yeah, so if the override doesn't pass, I think you were slated to lose one position.
A patrol officer position, yes.
So you feel that this will not have any kind of negative impact on,
No, I'd rather see our supervisory rank staffed at this point. That is, it's the position, it's either we remain vacant, if we don't fill it, we're either vacant in patrol, which we require overtime to fill, or we'll have to remain vacant in the detective division, which we only have right now 2 frontline sergeants, Sergeant Ward and Sergeant Riley's position. That's been vacant, and I'd rather see that one filled. He does, actually, one of his major jobs is domestic violence, so other officers, other detectives are picking it up, but it's nice to have a supervisor that concentrates on that.
okay.
Thank you. Anything further? All right, so I'm going to make 2 separate motions. The first is that we temporarily amend the police department table of organization by adding 1 sergeant position. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. And then the second motion is that we authorize the filling of the following vacancies within the police department after May 1st, 2015. 1 department superintendent, 1 lieutenant, and 3 sergeants.
Deputy super,
Deputy
I'm sorry, did I say,
you said department.
excuse me.
Begins with a D.
I'll start again. 3, we authorize the filling of the following vacancies within the police department effective May 1st, 2015. 1 deputy superintendent, 1 lieutenant, and 3 sergeants. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I vote aye.
Thank you.
May I, just while you're here, Chief, and it has to do with this, would you anticipate these are all civil, because they're going to be civil service positions, they'll be filled by individuals who are currently in the employment of the town?
Yes. And from a
This
rank-
doesn't involve any outside recruiting, I guess, is really what I'm asking you.
No, it does not. They're all from the current rank structure,
Right.
current staff that we have.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.
Next, we have Agenda Item 8, which is the question of authorizing the sale of $4,440,000 in general obligation bonds to the lowest bidder, namely Piper Jaffray. Mr. Cirillo.
Good evening. Stephen Cirillo, Finance Director. As stated, I'm here to get approval, seek approval from the Board of Selectmen to accepting this bond sale. We had the auction last week for $4,444,000. 6 bidders, had an excellent rate, average rate, or a rate of 1.578%. Actually, it's a little less than that. I rounded up on that one. Coupons of 3% for a period of years, and with a premium of $324,000. Also, I'd like to congratulate the town once again on receiving a AAA bond rating. I believe that's 20 years in a row, I believe. It's a hard job to keep that bond rating, and the reason we have the bond rating is because of financial policies that have been adopted by the selectmen and the town in general, keeping the town very strong financially. So I recommend this bond sale to be approved. We have reviewed, because it's always asked if there were any opportunities to refinance. There weren't any opportunities to refinance. Frankly, we have almost come to the end of our refinancing because our debt is so short in its term, and over the last, at least the last 8 years, we've been receiving rates of 2% or less. And so there's very little out there that we can do better than. Some of the debt that went out before 2000, it's coming off the books now, was at a higher rate, but it's coming off the books, so it wouldn't be worthwhile to refinance.
Can I sort of follow up on this topic, not directly related to the bond sale, but to the AAA rating? We heard a little earlier from Mr. Mazak that we're able to lease purchase temporary classrooms for Baker School, and I'm assuming that we get a favorable rate for that. And
yes.
we also heard that we're going to have a bank finance lease purchase agreement for equipment for the recreation department, which was published at 1.77%. Yeah, percent. So do you have any sense of the impact of a loss of the triple? In other words,
Oh, yes.
what those percentages might change to, or how they would be affected?
Well, I did an analysis this morning, coincidentally.
How convenient.
Not on the lease purchasing, but on the,
Well,
on the future debt.
Right.
That is currently in the capital plan. I believe we have a number of schools coming forward.
We have heard there are several school projects out there.
We could be in the market for something approaching $200 million over the next 10 years. Now, with that said, if you went from a AAA to a AA plus in a regular 10-year term, it would cost you about somewhere between 25 and 40 basis points, let's say 40 basis points. However, this bonding that is anticipated is in large numbers, and so therefore it is anticipated that those borrowings are going to be a longer term, 20 and 25 years. So it's very likely that a loss of a bond rating from a AAA to a AA plus, which is still a pretty good rating, would cost the town approximately 70 basis points. Now, translate that into the $200 million worth of debt. At 40 basis points, it would cost you somewhere in the vicinity of $11 million of extra interest. And at 70 basis points, it would cost you closing in on $20 million of extra interest payment over that 25-year period. So it's a significant amount of money to lose that AAA.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that you can quantify it that way. I think it's helpful for everybody to have a clearer understanding of the very high value of this AAA
absolutely.
bond rating.
Selectman Franco?
I too want to ask you a question about the AAA bond rating. But first, I want to also congratulate you on your role in helping us maintain that AAA bond rating. You lay it at the feet of the selectmen, and I think you deserve a tremendous amount of credit as well for your diligence and attention to these important details.
Thank you.
Here.
I had the opportunity to take a look at the Moody Investor Service rating report. And in that report, there's mention in 2 places of what could cause a downgrading in our bond rating. And specifically, it says a significant reduction in the general fund balance and free cash, and then it goes into a little bit more detail on the second page. I won't read it here, but sort of underscores that same point. And wanted to ask you about the implication of a possible failed override. There's been some conversations, should an override fail, about ways to reverse potential cuts, painful cuts that this board is going to be forced to make. And wanted to query you a little bit to see if you feel like there's additional funding in maybe the unapplied fund balance or in some of our reserve funds that could be redirected to mitigate or potentially eliminate some of the cuts, or if we're sort of at the lowest level we could go. I will add that, and I don't think you were here last week for this, I had opportunity to look at the Boston rating report. They just floated some bonds as well, and was shocked to see that their unapplied fund balance as a percentage of their expenditures was, I believe, 19%. And we in Brookline, I think, are at 11%. So it would seem to me that there's not much opportunity to redirect or reapply some of the money and funds.
This may be, I'll try to keep this answer short, but this is a very complicated issue. First of all, just a little history. I would say about 8 years ago, the town was receiving Moody ratings that indicated red flags that our undesignated fund balance was continuing to drop. And it got to the point of 5 years in a row that there was an indication that there was a possibility of a rating downgrade. At that point in time, the community called together a citizen group to review the financial policies of the community. And there were several significant recommendations, but the two that come to mind with me, I thought were the most important, was the recommendation that we, as the financial managers, drive, if possible, drive the undesignated fund balance with our policies to be above 10%. 10% is the dotted line in Massachusetts for AAAs. And we were, at that point in time, slightly below 10%. And so the policy that came out of that financial review was to take the free cash that had been certified and not spend all of it, but to leave something in the undesignated fund balance area. That, along with stabilization, combined together and divided by the previous year's revenue, gets you to the rate, the ratio, the percentage. And so when we began doing that about 4 years ago, our undesignated fund balance turned around and came back up over 10%. Our goal and target has been somewhere between 10.5 and 11, because we financial managers cannot be precise in pegging. I would love to be able to say 10%. If we had undesignated fund balance of X, we will get 10%. But there are so many numbers happening and so many numbers being clarified between July 1st and December, when you get your free cash certified, that you have to leave a little err on the side of conservatism in order to make sure that you don't fall below the 10%. Now, there are 25 AAAs in Massachusetts. Some of them I don't believe deserve to be AAAs, but there are 25 AAAs in Massachusetts. We are 24th out of 25th in undesignated fund balance. That's a bad sign. However, City of Newton is 25th, so that makes me feel a little better. Being the old budget director and treasurer from the City of Newton, that makes me feel a little better. We offset that by a tremendous value in our tax base and a tremendous collection rate. And we offset that particularly with strong financial policies. In the Moody's report, you have seen repeated year in and year out that the reason that we are considered a strong, a stable community is because of these financial policies that we follow. And so the long answer comes to, we should maintain our fund balance, undesignated fund balance, above 10%. We don't have very much flexibility in taking some money out of undesignated fund balance, essentially using free cash to support ongoing services, which would be a violation of every accounting principle. But we don't have flexibility in that anyway. If they were to do that, if the community were to do that, and I know there are members of the community that have been suggesting that, it is likely, and it's more than likely, we will drop below the 10%, and we will be, it will be difficult to get a AAA. One last thing, and to refer to your question about what happens if the override fails. That's a difficult question. The rating agencies look at us, and they're trying to measure the numbers, our wealth, our financial policies, but they're also trying to measure our willingness to solve any financial problems, if we have a problem, to deal with it. Rating agencies note if there's an override that fails. Now, I understand that there's a proposal out there that one override will fail and then another one will go on the ballot quickly and supposedly pass. I'm not, I can't determine if that's going to happen or not. But I can say this, that that's a risky proposition. And if you would have two general overrides fail in one short period of time, that definitely would be noticed by the rating agencies.
So let me just editorialize for 1 second. I hear that the AAA bond rating saves us a tremendous amount of money, tens of millions of dollars over the course of a large bond like a school, and that the rating agencies pay very close attention to our unapplied fund balance and to the willingness of the voters of the community to step up and address financial shortfalls or increasing expenses, and that there's a real potential that the AAA bond rating could be in jeopardy should we not maintain our stewardship of the financial house here in Brookline and be responsible in the way we address ongoing and increased expenses.
Steve, how did the bid for these bonds come out relative to what
Very,
we
very
planned?
Relative-
Relative to plan, relative what we expected to get?
Well, the plan is an estimated 3.75% was, I believe, in the operating budget. The coupons were 3%. Some of that money is in the enterprise fund, so that savings doesn't fall into the general fund and is left available for spending. Also, recall, we have, one of our financial policies is, as you remember, the 6% rule. So that money, if you would continue to follow the financial policies of the community, would be available for other capital expenditures or reserve funds, but should not be used for the direct services in the operating budget.
So can we expect some additional cash available for reserve funds as a result of the favorable interest
For
rate?
reserve funds?
For free cash?
You mean
reserve fund?
undesignated fund balance?
Thank you.
In fiscal year 17,
Right, yeah. 'Cause there's a-
fiscal 16.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Okay.
But
Unless,
you could-
yeah, Unless we had a budget
You could
amendment.
choose to move
for this year.
a capital project forward from an out year in closer, or if there is an estimated overage in one of the capital projects that you were planning on, and the town meeting was planning on approving for fiscal 16, if there was an overage in that, you can move that money into there. If you, this is a very small amount of money, very small.
I got that.
It's a small borrowing. $4.4 million is the smallest we borrowed in many, many years. And likely in the future, we won't be borrowing anything less than 8 or 9 figures in any of the future years.
Can I just, because we're on this subject, and it has to do to some extent with the debt exclusion part of the override. What I do understand, however, and I think you can fill in the details because I can't, we have a strategy where we take the greatest advantage of our ability to do short-term financing before we have to implement the full financing for a major capital project. So would you just very briefly outline some of that strategy? Because I think it's helpful to people to understand that the impact of a major borrowing in the order of not 4 million, but tens of millions, could be quite significant.
Sure. Well, first of all, there are other pieces of this, of course, and one of the terms that we are always concerned with is something called arbitrage.
Right.
You have a project that will possibly range over $100 million in the near future. You do not want to borrow all of that at the same time because it takes a period of time to expend the money, and you could find yourself in an arbitrage situation. Now, of course, we have the great economy that could help protect us against that because our interest yield is far less than what we're borrowing at. But arbitrage has to be taken into consideration. So what the plan has always been is to, on capital projects of this nature, is to borrow in pieces. However, you don't know how much to borrow. In the first years of this project, you want to put a ban in place, which is basically a temporary one-year borrowing, interest only, and then the ban gets rolled over to another year. It's basically a temporary one-year borrowing that continues to get rolled over until you know enough about when to borrow to make it a long-term borrowing. Right now, we have a plan for bans, but if the rates continue to be good, and they're excellent right now, we could be into the project and say, all right, we know we've spent X, so why don't we take that and put that into a long-term borrowing? We could do that. However, we also have to time it against when the interest hits the books against the other projects that are there, so that we still maintain our fiscal policy of living within that 6%. 6% of the prior year revenue for capital/debt. So it's a complicated thing.
The long answer, but the short implication of what you've said is if voters approve a debt exclusion override for X millions of dollars, we're not going to borrow that all immediately.
No, not, the town will be borrowing those funds probably over a period of 4 or 5 years. And so. Incrementally, and I believe our financial plan includes the debt exclusion piece being last, so it's.
Right.
It's out.
Right.
So it's out in
I'm going to say 18 or 19.
Yeah.
I think it's fiscal 19.
So in effect, what we're saying is the vote is really an authorization to borrow.
Oh, yes.
As opposed to a borrowing immediately of the millions of dollars. It's authorization to borrow under our prudent management plan.
The override?
Yeah.
The override, the authorization to borrow comes from town meeting. The authorization to take the cost of the debt service and add it to the property tax.
Right.
As an extension of is
Right.
what's being permitted to do.
Right.
And that won't hit until fiscal 19.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, I'm going to move that we authorize the sale of $4,440,000 in general obligation bonds to the lowest bidder, Piper Jaffray, in the language of the proposed vote contained on pages 8-3 and 8-4 of your packet, which are too lengthy to read in its totality. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I vote aye.
And if I could just add one thing there, I apologize, but every year when we have a bond sale, there is a lot of signatures that have to be added tonight. If you could, I'd appreciate it, and I'll be picking them up tomorrow. We'll be taking a receipt of these $4.4 million next week.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to agenda item 9, which is continuing review of the departmental budgets and our financial plan. We're up to our human resources and benefits budget. Ms. DeBoe.
Good evening, Sandra DeBoe, Director of Human Resources. Well, I don't have a whole lot to say about my budget this year, which I think is a good thing. I know. We're pretty much being level funded for our department. The only increase is a small capital increase for an additional computer that we're leasing, and step increases that we are obligated to adhere to. Some of the things that we've been doing this year is helping payroll roll out a brand-new payroll system, which has kept us all very busy and on our toes. We've been working a lot with the Diversity and Inclusion and Community Relations Office to start some new initiatives, and just keeping busy with our department heads and having their departments move forward.
Selectman Daley?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So on your performance workload indicators, I'm on section 4, page 7
Okay.
of the budget book. And I noticed that the actuals for 2014 on the workers' comp, the town was higher than you anticipated, and the school was substantially less than you anticipated on workers' comp. Well, what explains that variation? Do you know?
Well, these are, over here, these are estimates, of course, that we work on with Sean, and it depends on the outcomes that we finally come to. We had a couple of what we thought were tough and going to be expensive workers' comp claims that we actually settled with the authorization of you all. I think we had 3 or 4 this year. So that certainly keeps our costs down. But Leslia is the assistant director. She works very closely with workers' comp. She may have something to say about that as well.
But the school one in particular is like only half what you were expecting it to be, and
Or even what the actual was in fiscal 13.
yeah, so that went down dramatically. I'm wondering if we're doing something right, or that was just good luck, because I noticed your estimate for the upcoming years is more in line with the actuals in 2014.
So the workers' comp is the combination of giving someone, continuation of their payroll and also covering their medical costs. And so, when you have something like the school department where not everyone is covered under workers' comp, we have custodians, we have teachers' aides, we have some clerical positions, but the rest of the positions are not covered under workers' comp. So there's a smaller section of people there that are covered. And it really depends on whether there's an injury or not, and how expensive that injury might be, depending on what the medical costs are. So it's very hard to predict. We had a good year in the school department, very few injuries, and also it depends on how expensive, like I said, those injuries can be. You could have one surgery that could be $60,000, $70,000. So that would dramatically change the budget number.
Okay. The next line down, I was having trouble interpreting, and it says job injuries, WC, which I assumed was workers' comp, / police and fire. So police and fire are not under workers' comp, is that
That's
that right?
correct. Injury on duty is different section of the law, handled a little bit differently than workers' comp, and so we've separated them out here for you.
Okay, but we did have 97 workers' comp claims then for the actuals for 2014.
Yes.
So that was higher than you anticipated and significantly higher than the actuals for 2013.
Yes.
And what kind of analysis do you guys go through as to, why we're getting a lot more claims than we expect, and what we can do about that to bring the injury rate down?
There are a lot of things, and one of the things that, and actually this year, fortunately, it hasn't been as bad, but the weather is a big factor, and we did have a terrible winter. I think we're fortunate we have not seen the amount of injuries that I was really bracing for based on the weather. We did have a pretty bad winter last year. We had a number of storms, and they just kept coming over every weekend. We did have more injuries because of that. And those tend to be your sprains and strains. What we do is we try to.
Is that, you're talking about people like shoveling snow, or are they falling on ice?
You actually get all range of injuries. So you have some back injuries from sitting in a plow. You have shoveling is a big one.
Yeah.
And we do have some slips and falls on ice. Last year, there was lots of ice.
Yeah.
That was a big problem. And so, that can be a big factor in the winter. So we do see that. We do have a new third-party administrator. We've had them for about a year. And one of the things that we're trying to tap into that they do offer us is some terrific safety programs that are online that you can download, that you can do mini safety programs and safety shorts. So that's something that we've just had them for 1 year now. We're looking forward to, really tapping more into what they can offer us. So that's another thing that we can do
Because
too.
there are those sort of stretchy things you can put on your boots so you don't slip on the ice. I mean, I'm just wondering if we're constantly looking to see if we're having a lot of accidents that are slip and falls on ice, if we could maybe do some simple, relatively inexpensive things to bring that number down.
So certainly, those are things that we would always look on. When it comes to police and fire, though, it really is hard to predict how they're going to get injured. And a lot of their injuries occur over time, so knees, backs. I mean, these, and also with DPW, these are very physically demanding jobs. And so I think that accounts for this as well, that sometimes people just have recurring injuries. We actually had a random, almost, spot check from the Department of Labor who went to DPW, and we just passed with flying colors. So it is something that we are always mindful of, but we do a pretty good job of maintaining a safe work environment and partnering with New England Baptist and their OC Health. We really are providing our employees probably with better care than any other municipality, and making sure that they're doing the rehab and they're not returning back to work sooner than they should and then getting re-injured. So certainly we look, I'm not sure we have many slips and falls. Every once in a while we'll have the occasional poison ivy from the tracks and the T from the school traffic supervisors. But it is hard to predict. Right, we do count those.
Bee stings, poison ivy, we do count all, so those are also, mixed in here. All of
Oh,
those
really?
types of
Okay, the
injuries, yes.
poison ivy's in there.
Yeah. We do ask everyone to report an injury regardless. We want to know, there are some people that a bee sting could be a serious thing. They may be allergic to it, they may have a reaction later on.
My
So
son's highly allergic to the
Yeah.
poison ivy, so he ends up at the emergency room sometimes with that.
And one of the things that we've added to this listing is the time lost and the no time lost, because that, I think, is an important factor for us to consider, that even though we may have had 71 injuries, there were only 35 workdays that were lost. So that's why we've added this column, because people do report, we want them to report, but at the same time, we're trying to get them back to work and as quickly and as healthily as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Selectman Waschinsky.
Again, in the workload performance indicators, under unemployment claims, it looks like you're estimating, pretty constant. Does that take into account a no override scenario where unemployment claims could in fact go up? Because I know potentially there might be some layoffs in the schools, or does that not appear in this budget? That would be on the school side.
We have not increased these numbers based on the potential for the override not to pass. So we did not up these numbers with that in mind. I will say these are very hard numbers to predict.
Right.
As you know, unemployment, we can be a secondary employer. The first employer didn't work long enough, didn't have enough money to pay them, they tap into us, we get hit with part of that. So these are very difficult to predict.
So if we estimate low, what happens? We have to go to the reserve fund? Is that what happens? or-
You know, it's been coming down since, 2009, 2010. We've seen a little bit of a decrease every year. This year, we look, again, to be a little bit lower than last year, so those are good things. I'm not expecting another spike and like we had 5 years ago. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
If we come in over 300, that means we have to go to the reserve fund?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a trust fund.
Oh,
So
okay.
we have money that is remaining in there, and we carry
Gotcha,
that balance
gotcha.
forward. So
Okay.
it would depend on how high those expenditures went.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
okay.
Selectman DeWitt.
A different question, probably for Sandra. I was interested, actually, this evening we had two good illustrations of different kinds of job, let's call it recruitment. And I know you're working very closely with the Diversity Office to try to improve our diversity. And I know there are rules that you have to follow when trying to fill positions that are not the same in public safety, for example, as in what I'm going to call our civilian employees. We asked the chief about the fact that he's about to do some promotions, and would that give an opportunity to recruit and hire? The answer was no, it will be from within. And yet, I imagine we're going to recruit from outside to fill the vacancy in the library. And so I guess, and then there's a note under the librarian's position saying job description is under review for editing as it is technology-based and is 13 years old.
Right.
So can you just give us like an overview, I'm going to say, how we make sure our job descriptions are current in technology? I could imagine that would evolve enormously
Right.
in very short space of time. And also a little bit to compare the civilian versus the civil service, all right, the non-civil service and the civil service procedures and opportunities.
Okay, so the civil service procedures for police and fire are pretty simple. You have to hire off a list. If you're hiring for promotions, it's the list is from your current employees because they're the ones who have taken the test.
Which means you can't do outreach. You're really basically limited to the current pool of employees.
They did recently do a session over at one of our, some of our housing authority buildings to tell people about taking the civil service test in the
Right.
beginning. So
So-
there has been some efforts to sort of
Right.
outreach to let people know that you have to take that test if you want to even be eligible to be in
And
the fire and police department.
Thank you for mentioning that. I was hoping that we'd hear that, but I also think it's important to make it clear that we have less opportunity, if that's the right way to put it, under civil service
So
than we do under not civil service.
So I would echo what Nancy just said. That's what I was going to say. I think that we do an excellent job, the police department in general, in reaching out and trying to get people to take that civil service test.
Right.
What's most important is that you get them in
You
as
need to get
patrol
into the
officers.
system.
Right. What you're talking about, which is very limited, is the promotional. So, but if you have a diverse pool of applicants that are highly qualified within the police department, which we do, that's a good thing,
Sure.
that you're promoting the most qualified up. With regard to generally how we recruit, we look very closely at the level of the position we're recruiting as to how long the posting goes up. If it's a clerical position where there are going to be literally hundreds of applications that come in, we may only post for a week or two. If it's a higher level position, we generally post for a month. When you have an instance, and this doesn't happen very often, but when you have an instance like in the library, when that position has been filled for I don't even know how long, yes, absolutely, there needs to be a new look at that job description. I can tell you, though, in most departments, those job descriptions don't sit there for that long, because mostly in all our departments, things are changing. And as the organization changes, the job descriptions change as well. And there's a whole process of how that occurs. We have about 14 class and pay plans. More than half of them are covered by unions. The unions have clauses as to who is in their union versus another union. So an engineer is going to be in the engineers union, and the dispatcher is going to be in the dispatchers union. Their job descriptions have to be consistent with the job duties that they're doing under the contract. Many of them grew out of the civil service, but we have a lot, like the libraries, that did not. So the library has its own class and pay plan. It's an assistant director position. So we would be looking at what are other assistant directors in, that have to do with technology. This is one that where we would probably look to the outside to see if it is appropriately graded. That is not generally the case when we're hiring a vacancy, because usually these job descriptions are pretty up to date. And there's a whole process that we go through, meeting with the department head, tweaking the job description as necessary or if at all. And then if there is a change to the job description, it has to go to the HR board that makes sure that it's consistent with our class and pay plan and the minimal requirements and
Okay,
so
so
on.
basically what I think you're saying is it's more complicated than it sounds. Or I guess what I'm hearing is when we say to you, please go out and recruit and bring us the most diverse population of candidates possible, you do everything you can within your power, but there are also civil service rules, collective bargaining restrictions, and other issues that mean that it's a challenge, if I can be.
So I was really answering two different, completely different questions. One has to do with what's the process of a job description, and that has, is consistent with the class and pay plan, of which it would be the unions, blah, blah, blah. The issue of how we recruit is fairly standard. I mean, if it's a professional position, we will send out the listserv that Dr. Gelano has put together, but we will also reach out to any professional groups, any affinity groups that are within that profession. We always list on the Commonwealth Compact, we post it. It could be that we are posting in universities. I mean, there's a whole plethora of tools that we use when we're recruiting.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anything further from Ms. DeBoe? All right, so we've done the human resources part, but now after the slash is the benefits part, and Mr. Kleckner will discuss that with us in the absence of Ms. Goff.
And if you could stay up there, Sandra, in case there are any questions, I would note that Melissa Goff submitted a memorandum about health insurance in particular, but I'll cover in general the whole personnel benefits section, which is section 4 page 125.
Thank you.
The major benefits that the town provides are pensions and health insurance, and those comprise the substantial bulk of the benefits budget. I did want to mention health insurance a little bit because there has been some changes after a few years of very modest increases in the premiums attributable to the GIC, and we belong to the Group Insurance Commission, so-called GIC, which is the plan for state employees, and a few years ago, cities and towns were allowed to join, and as you recall, we did. And they have been very modest increases, but this past year, or I should say the premium setting for next fiscal year, indicated some, perhaps as the economy changed, perhaps as the Affordable Care Act is taking shape, there were a number of plan increases, especially in the two plans that most directly affect us, which is the Harvard Pilgrim and the Tufts Navigator plans. And those went up by 9.2% and 7% respectively, much higher than what we had anticipated. Now, we began to get the flavor that that was going to happen early in the budget process, and we were able to reallocate some funds through the school-town partnership to cover that, but that wasn't even enough. And then fortunately, the timing was such that about the time that these health insurance rates broke, we also became aware of a greater state aid that we were anticipating receiving once the governor's budget was filed. So we are able to cover these expenses even within the parameters of the override that we had previously identified. So that's the case with health insurance. With pensions, we are on a funding schedule, so that 4.6% you see under the contributory pensions is a very routine amount as we embark on our funding of our unfunded liability. All of the other ones, we continue to do a great job, I think, in getting ahead of the OPEB issue, which is other post-employment benefits, which is basically retiree health insurance. And we're doing a good job. We're increasing that appropriation a bit. But for the most part, the other insurance and other benefit issues are relatively flat. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Selectman Franco.
I have two questions specific to health insurance. The first is, based on the memo that Ms. Goff prepared, it appears as though 2/3 of our active employees are in PPO plans. So I'm curious to know what efforts we're taking to promote non-PPO plans, maybe HMOs or other health insurance options.
Sure. We feel that we have an ethical obligation to allow people to choose the plan that is fits their family the best. But I can tell you that we do encourage people, and we do talk about the HMOs and the difference between the PPOs and the HMOs, and even neighborhood health is a plan that a lot of our younger employees take. It is one of our cheaper ones, but it is also one of the ones that is more cost efficient. I know the GIC is really interested in people migrating, if you will, to the Unicare, and we have a lot of materials that they've sent us that we are going to have at our wellness fair that gives them information about them. It really is about name recognition and what people are most comfortable with. I think that one of the plan design changes is that most of the PPOs are going to become POSs. And what that means is they're going to have a primary care physician who will give them referrals. It'll be the same network. It won't be a limited network like the HMO. But I'm wondering if in the next couple of years, people are going to start dropping into the cheaper HMOs. After they have that experience with the POS and they're comfortable with it. I also want to say that when we were pleasantly surprised when we first went into the GIC, that a lot more people went into HMOs than we had anticipated. And so I think that people sort of picked a plan and sort of stuck with it. And so we're encouraging and trying to continue to educate people about all their choices. And I feel like, we can't really twist arms, but we continue to fight the good fight.
Can I just a quick follow-up on that one? Just to say that I had the impression when we first were able to join the GIC that one of the attractions of PPOs was for individuals who had a relationship with a physician to maintain that relationship, which was not as easy to do if you changed into an HMO plan. And I'm just wondering if that, I would think over time with, new employee sign-ons, that would have shifted.
I remember that with regard to the indemnity plans. And that a lot of people, we thought a lot more people would go to the indemnity plans,
Yeah.
and instead they went to the PPOs and the HMOs. So I'm not really remembering that continuity of care. It really has to do with whether your doctor is in the network or not.
Well, I guess what I was trying to say is what I heard from people
Yeah.
is they chose something that permitted them to stay with the physician they knew. And that guided the decision-making. And it had less to do sometimes with the cost if it was not a huge difference. And I would have thought over time, as new people entered the system, they would theoretically not be, well, maybe they are arriving with relationships. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, you know what, one of the things that we haven't done, and I don't even know if this would be easy to do, is an analysis of where people have been going when they first come on. It really largely depends on whether they're in an individual plan or a family plan,
Right.
whether they want a lot of mobility. I mean, I think the same doctors, for the most part, are in Harvard and Tufts, PPO and HMO. It's just when you get referrals, where can you go, whether you
got
go
it.
in or
Whether
out
you
of
go
that
out,
network.
right.
Right, and so I think that people like to have that freedom, even if they don't exercise it.
Right, got it.
So we just continue. I mean, I really think that our employees are becoming better consumers. You know, they know the difference between a deductible and their co-pays, and, you know, I really think they are beginning to make better choices. And we will see what happens. Open enrollment begins on the 9th, and we will see if people start moving out of those higher premium from the PPOs or the POSs now
Right.
to the HMOs.
Selectman Franco, I think you had a second question.
I did, and on the same sort of theme of reducing the overall expenses and expenditures related to health insurance, have we seen any movement as the Affordable Care Act has been implemented on town employees not taking advantage of our health insurance abilities or options and instead going through the health insurance offerings of a spouse, or maybe going even through the insurance exchange instead? Or are we still sort of seeing this same level of utilization?
I think generally we've seen the same level of utilization. I think, and we continue to have more or additional people opt out each year, but that's something of our own design. It's not really related to the federal Health Care Act or anything. And so it's going to be an interesting year. It'll be an interesting year because of the copay changes and the deductibles have all gone up, whether people are going to continue to stay in the town plans or not.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that, these rates of 9 and 7 are high, but they would have been much higher had the GIC not engaged in some plan design, which the PPO to POS, point of service plan, as well as increasing deductibles and copays to some extent. And I do think that will cause people to look around this year. I personally am going to do that, I know, and if I'm going to do it, I assume a lot of other people are going to be doing it too.
That leads me to my question. This is for you, Mr. Kleckner, because I know you're on the GIC.
On the commission, yeah.
How does anything go up 9.2% in a year? And does the GIC have an ability to put the brakes on that and possibly exclude Harvard Pilgrim Independence from the GIC if they can't maintain their rates better than that?
Yep, well, if you know Dolores Mitchell, who's the executive director of the GIC, you'll know that she is relentless and in terms of this idea, and she's very frustrated. Health insurance, other than a few years ago, this was typical. It was double-digit increases in the rate of health insurance. Healthcare is twice the rate of inflation at least. And so I think we're getting back as the economy improves, and we're seeing this. These are some of the issues. I raised the issue of whether we should create a freeze in enrollment in these two plans, and we're considering that. We have to balance, the commission has to balance the cost and the benefits to employees. Unfortunately, Boston, the greater Boston region, is probably the most expensive health care industry in the world, never mind the country.
But it has been for a long time. That doesn't entitle it to go up by almost 10% in a year. I mean, I think there needs to be some accountability for these plans that are way 4 times the rate of inflation.
Would that freeze be done at the GIC level? Or,
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So one of the things, as an observer and not on the commission, one of the things to note is last year, Tufts and Harvard were the lowest increases. So whether there's a catch-up, whether it was artificially low, I'm not going to speculate on that, but they were the lowest increases of all the plans.
Well, what's it going to be next year, then?
We'll hope,
Prescription drugs was a huge factor this year.
on the upper tiers.
But, if you listen to Dolores Mitchell, that's her mantra, and, she makes the health plans very uncomfortable, I can assure you, and, but I'm very frustrated too, Ken, and something has to change. I don't think we can see these increases for more than a year or two.
Okay. Selectman Daley?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, as I'm looking through the benefits, and I'm happy, Mr. Kleckner, that you mention in the narrative that the plan to redirect funds from when the pension fund is fully funded, to redirect those funds over to the OPEB fund, because that was something our committee recommended years ago, and I just want people to keep remembering it, since it'll be a while before we get there to 2030.
Yeah, we can't rely on that solely, but that definitely is a strategy.
Anything further on this subject? Well, thank you.
Can I just point out to Neil that on page 132 is our chart on unemployment, and you'll see
I had
what we have in the
noticed
fund balance versus, we should be okay if, heaven forbid, we lose some employees next year.
Thank you, Ms. DeBoe.
You're welcome, thank you.
On to our recreation budget, Ms. Paradis.
Good evening. I will try to make this as riveting as the GIC. So as you know, the recreation budget is comprised of 3 separate funds. One is the general fund budget, which this year comes in at $1,018,816. It is a $32,816 decrease, or 3.2%. The golf enterprise fund is our second budget fund, and that comes in this year at $1,376,311. It's an total increase of about $44,000, or 3%. The revolving fund this year comes in at $2,882,651, and it is an increase of about $133,000, or 4.8%. There's about a $50,000 carryover from the general fund budget to the revolving fund budget this year. And our cost recovery increased from 77.4% to 77.9% this year overall. So we're going in the right direction. I can take questions about numbers at the end. I'll go over a few of the things that we've done in the last year, and any questions we can do then, of course. Just to kind of talk a little bit about the business model and what that has kind of helped us to do over the last 5 years. We've transitioned to a cost recovery model, and it's really helped us to framework transparency and articulate where tax dollars are being spent in the revolving funds. And it's allowed us to really focus our efforts on programs and services that truly serve the patrons, the residents of Brookline and the community, that are both cost efficient and also reflect the mission of the Brookline recreation community. Last year, well, actually, Brookline offers over 450 programs and services, all the way from aqua aerobics to Zumba and everything in between. We have 33 full-time employees and anywhere from 200 to 300 part-time employees. Of course, that is seasonal. Highlights over the past year include our third very successful annual Brookline Day and our second very successful Brookline Day Road Race held at Lars Anderson Park last September. This year we plan on doing the same. It'll be on September 20th, 2015, so you can mark your calendars. This year we also had 1,200 youth playing recreation soccer each spring and fall, another 500 youth playing lacrosse. Our Joel No basketball program and travel teams had over 550 participants, combining for about 53 youth teams. High school basketball increased to about 96 players this year. We have over 1,800 youth who take part in our summer camp programs, and our summer lunch program is in our second full year, providing thousands of meals to summer camp participants. Our Lunch and Learn program is a program that we've partnered with the Board of Health, and it is an exchange of information and ideas between agencies about the programs for Brookline's underserved populations. Golf this year was started off to be rough. Last April was just about as rough as this April is turning out to be, but we still managed to meet and exceed our revenue expectations. Which was always our game plan. It's our business model there to have more stable financial environment so that we don't have to always rely on the weather at the golf course. We've done an enormous amount of capital improvements, and the drainage has helped to produce that kind of revenue as well. This year, we've increased by 7 teams in the Special Olympics program in the Brookline chapter, and we've raised over $15,000 for that chapter to continue its fine work. Lastly, another notable thing is that Brookline's work in the youth concussion policy field has been a template and a pioneer in the policy world, both in Massachusetts and at the state level, as well as in many other states across the country. So we're proud to keep expanding that legislation.
Questions? Selectman Daley?
Yeah, Lisa, there's not too much in your objectives or accomplishments, but I know you have a number of programs geared towards seniors, and I wonder if you can talk about
Sure.
what you've got in that area, and if any of it's expanding or what's happening.
Yeah. Well, we actually had, this year we took the opportunity to really do an inventory of our programs and an assessment of how they were working, and to look at what we were overlapping with the Council on Aging and the Senior Center. So we worked together with the Council on Aging and their group to try to come up with some more dynamic and interesting programs. So what we're doing with them is continuing on with some of our daytime trip programs, day trips. We take groups of seniors to different places, plays and shopping trips and things like that, places that they couldn't otherwise get to if they were not with us. And then we are continuing to focus our efforts on health and wellness activities for seniors, where the Council on Aging and the Senior Center is really doing a lot more in the sort of entertainment and in-house kind of stuff. We're focusing our efforts this year on health and wellness, walking groups especially, things like that are geared just towards senior citizens. So.
Great.
Lisa, about 5 years ago, we had a presentation here and adopted a policy based on a pyramid method of recovering costs in recreation programs. And to put it in a nutshell, the most individualized programs paid the most, and the least individualized paid the least. Is that plan fully implemented at this point? Is it successfully implemented at this point? And do we see further need to revise, edit, tweak that program?
Yeah, so we're actually in our 4th year of implementation, full implementation. I would say our 2nd year, actually, of full implementation. It took us 3 years to kind of ramp up to get to that point. Yes, I would say it's very successful. And I kind of alluded to that when I talked about the fact that business model, based on cost recovery, is about reallocation of funds that go toward subsidy for those programs that are least subsidized, if that provide more community benefit, but you can't charge as much for instance. And that methodology has been working very well for us. It's really shaped our whole business model, and it's enabled us to really know our true cost of doing business and the true taxpayer subsidy, as well as our market value. We do a lot of work in that that space of determining what our market value is for every single one of our 450-plus programs, and then determine if we're charging the right fee and where we can be in that space. And it's actually worked incredibly well. We have a great method for that, and I would say it was probably one of the best things that we've ever done within the business in recreation.
Somewhat related question. I know that we have various scholarships or subsidies that are needs-based for recreation program.
Mhm.
Is there a specific line item for that, or can you put a number on it? Can you tell us how much?
Page 4-114.
Yep. Thank you.
Because I was looking at it.
Off
too.
the top, I want to say it's in the neighborhood of
$85,000.
$85,000.
It
Thank
sure
you.
is right there.
So, yes, there is that specific line item for that, but we cap each one of our cost centers at a certain amount. So we allocate just so we have a fixed cost to each one of those cost centers. So we cap within reason. I mean, we have some flexibility naturally if we need to go over in certain areas.
Well, that was my
And-
next question. Is the need outstripping the revenues available for it?
This is our first year of actually the capping model. Our needs have always outstripped our ability to fund that. So we end up kind of scrambling at the end. But the capping from the beginning has worked really well, and in certain cost centers. But for instance, when you take into consideration the camp program, for instance, this year we did not have as much of a grant as we normally get from Brookline Community Foundation, for instance, and we still serve the same number, if not more, families based out of Brookline Mental Health Center and with the extended school year population. So, and many of those families are the same families that require some financial assistance. So we've just found this out now last week from BCF. So we are in that process of trying to figure out how we're going to reallocate some of that funding to make sure that all of those families get served. So.
Can I just have a very brief follow-up? Because I was going to ask about this line item. How does this compare to what you're putting in this year compared to last year?
Oh, it's slight increase of about 5%, not much more than that. But again, that's the budgeted amount. Hard to tell what the real amount will be at the end of the year.
Right, I understand. Since it's a new thing, I was interested in understanding how it related.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything further? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Very
you.
thorough. Actually, you're not going anywhere, are you? Because we're moving on to our consideration of warrant articles. and,
Wata.
Yep. No, we're at.
Is Lisa doing the living wage? Yeah.
Living wage.
So,
Let's change folders.
okay, got it. So we're moving on to agenda item 10, which is consideration, public hearings, possible votes of warrant articles for the May 26, 2015 annual town meeting. And the first one is warrant article 10, which is a warrant article proposed by the Recreation Department. So we'll call on Ms. Paradis again.
Thank you. I'm here with Sandra DeVoe and Leslie Noble, who are, Sandra and I were the co-authors of this warrant article. And this is several years in the making, actually. We've talked about this specific issue for quite a while, and it finally has come to fruition, and we're thrilled that it's actually at a time that that there is an increase of significance within the minimum wage here in Massachusetts. So the reason for Article 10 has been there have been a few issues that have come up over the time, and let me give a little bit of background actually before I Article 10, or Brookline Living Wage was enacted in 2001, and it was in recognition that the minimum wage had not kept pace with the cost of living for families nationwide. The current Brookline Living Wage rate is $13.19 an hour, and at this point, it will increase again on July 1st. There is no town or contractor or employee that is paid less than $13.19, and there are some limited exemptions. The exempt positions are paid no less than $10 an hour, which is $1 more per hour than the current state minimum wage. There are, to date right now, a snapshot, there are 77 exemptions that exist right now that are made up, and 31 of those are recreation personnel, seasonal recreation personnel. There are 4 emerging concerns that we really felt like we needed to address with Article 10. And first was, I've just talked about the state minimum wage. It is increased, and it will be by 2017 the highest enacted minimum wage in the country. And the second part is that the increase of the living wage imposed on the very youngest of employees, and it causes a ripple effect upward, with us having to pay more per hour for employees that have just a small amount of experience. The demographics of this particular group that we are talking about is a very young group of entry-level student youth workers. They are typically ages 15 to 17. They're in the junior category or classification. They would be junior lifeguards, junior counselors, junior skate guards in that category. And they are typically high school kids naturally, and they do not have any experience typically and this would be their first job. At this point right now, the living wage says that if they come to work for Brookline Recreation, and we are happy to have them, by the way, we love to give kids their first jobs. That is one of our missions, is to have this wonderful, thriving opportunity for all of the Brookline community kids. They come into our department and make $10 an hour. Upon the date of their 6-month anniversary, whether they've worked for us as a junior lifeguard 1 hour a week or 15 hours a week, upon that date, they automatically get a 30+% raise to $13.19 an hour. And I think that was one of the unintended consequences of this particular bill, or this particular bylaw that was passed in 2001, that it sort of didn't have any age requirements or any experience requirements. And we are just seeking to sort of focus our efforts on that particular age group of kids to exempt them from this living wage. The last thing that needs to be taken into consideration really is the effect that it has on our program fees. And it truly does have an effect on program fees in that this is the largest group of our part-time population is our seasonal and temporary part-time workers. And it does drive up the costs. And we will soon get to a point where we cannot really afford to pay the living wage were it to continue to go up at the rate that it has at this point. Out of the 450 programs that I mentioned previously in my budget review, there are only 10 that supply us with 80% of our revenue. So we can't continue to increase the costs or the fees associated with those 10 programs and continue with this kind of overhead that we would have. So with that being said, I would like to turn it over to Leslie, who I think has a few more items that I might not have spoken about.
We took a look at some other communities just to see what their current living wage ordinances or bylaws were. We have some local communities that have the living wage. We have Cambridge, Somerville, Boston, Suffolk County. I took a look at those, and one of the things that became very clear to me, I also went to Connecticut and New York because, as you know, countrywide, there's probably only 120-something communities that have this living wage. In all of those ordinances or bylaws, there were exemptions in every single one of these for either students under age 21 or for youth employment programs. And so we were the only bylaw that didn't have that kind of exemption. And I think it's exactly what Lisa was talking about. We're looking at, giving these great first job opportunities to these young people. Generally, we did a snapshot of our current payroll. The average age was 17. So we're looking at generally high school students. And so we were lacking in our bylaw in that. And as Lisa said, this is what we're concerned about, is the effect on her programming, which is so important. We also noticed that none of these ordinances or bylaws had a minimum wage for people that were exempt from the living wage, which we do. So none of them had that provision in there either. Our premise is that we will have one of the highest enacted minimum wages in the country. And so, is it reasonable that a 15-year-old coming in would be paid by January of 17, $11 an hour? Is that a reasonable wage for them to be receiving? And we felt that that was reasonable, and that $1 more would have a really unfavorable impact on some of these really good programs that they all benefit from as well. So we'll take any questions.
One other point that I just wanted to make, that the Personnel Subcommittee of the Advisory Committee, who looked at this first, they were really, again, we're talking about the living wage applying to this very small group of young workers after 6 months, because that's when it kicks in. One of the things that really bothered them was the fact that here's an employee, it's their first job ever, they're getting a 30% increase regardless of how much they worked or how well they've worked, just because of this bylaw that's on the book. And they felt like this really was setting a very poor example for a brand-new employee in the workforce. And that's something that I hadn't even considered when we were first looking at that, but I think it's a really good point that they're making. I mean, that is just not the example we want to set for our youth, that they automatically get an increase regardless of their effort. And just to clarify, so we're asking that this group be exempt from the living wage so that they would be paid the minimum wage, and that we're also asking that we align the bylaw with the state's minimum wage. Municipalities do not have to accept the minimum wage, but we have, plus $1. And what we're asking is that minimum wage, that the bylaw be aligned with the state's minimum wage.
Questions for our petitioners? What's the next highest grade working in the recreation department above these juniors making $10 an hour? Like among the full-time, non-junior, regular employees, what would be the next highest grade?
So we have, I want to just talk a little bit about, we have other temporary workers, and they are most often in the labor force, and we cannot get those employees at 13.19 per hour. I think that the lowest is around 16, and they go upwards from there. But when it comes to our regular employees, the lowest level, I would have to double check, but for the most part, many of our positions, if not most of them, are at least $20 an hour.
Can I just follow up? I think, Ms. Paradis, I'm sorry, a lot of data to absorb, and I may misquote you, but you said you had maybe 400 seasonal temporary employees, was that right?
Anywhere from from 2 to 300.
2 to 300.
Given the
Okay.
season, some
All
are a
right.
lot more.
So
obviously.
of that number, let's just call it 300 because it's round, how many would be affected? In other words, how many of the 300 seasonal people you employ would be the youth who you would like to exempt?
So currently, that would be 31.
31
For the current-
positions?
Yes.
Totally 31
Total.
out
Yes.
of possibly
Right.
300?
Yep.
Oh, well, that strikes me
Yeah.
as a
Most-
perfectly,
Yeah.
but those 31 slots are usually going to kids from low-income households
No.
No?
Not necessarily, no, no. I mean,
Isn't there youth employment in, maybe I'm mixing things up in my head, so clear me out if I've
yes.
said the
So
wrong thing.
actually, if you're speaking about CDBG granted,
Yep, yep.
like the Steps to Success
Right,
program,
right.
that program is already exempted. So
Ah,
that program
okay.
does not follow living wage. So
Okay.
those kids do get paid less than living wage.
Okay.
But no, there is we don't have any program like that because CDBG was actually a rec program, or the Steps to Success.
Right.
What it is now used to be.
I
Used
know.
to be a rec
All
program.
right, so those would be not affected, but we're just talking about approximately 30 plus or minus
Yeah, it's a very
positions.
small amount of our, very
All right.
small number of our actual.
I
employees.
understand. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Are there any temporary employees who are not high school students?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And how many of them are there?
I'd have to check, but, I mean, obviously it would be do you know that number?
So townwide or
Oh,
recreation?
you mean those? Yeah, townwide or recreation?
Recreation.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, we have a lot of college students and, people out of college.
I did do an average age, and it was 19. So we're still pretty, and that's an average of the students at living wage, anybody who's at living wage in recreation, and that was the average age of 19.
So, but conceivably, some of the affected people here, though, could be people who were emancipated, they're not, living under their parents' roofs, they're doing everything they can to cobble together a living. Maybe they're working part-time, temporary for the rec department in the summer, and they're working, at Starbucks some more hours, and, they're,
But the seasonal employees were always exempt.
no, I
So
understand.
they've added
That's
the
why I
or
asked about the-
temporary.
That's why I asked
yeah.
about the temporary.
Yeah. Well, that's just a clarification in terms, and I will let them take care of that piece of that.
So the seasonal designation, and Lisa is an excellent example of someone who's misusing it all tonight. So we've been trying to get department heads to talk about temporary employees versus seasonal employees. A seasonal employee designation is a very narrow designation under the law as to who is eligible or not eligible for unemployment. And so we have bus drivers and teachers, and there might be one other category. But so we've been trying, we just revised the class and pay plan. The term is really temporary employees. We do have temporary employees throughout the town. Generally, those temporary employees are getting much higher, more competitive wages. I don't know how many emancipated young children that we have working for the town. We would certainly try to steer them into full-time or more regular part-time positions. These are positions that are that they're working really sporadically, and we put a listing in all that, right? And we met with Patricia Connors, who was the original author of this bylaw. One of the questions we got from the advisory committee is if we were focused on youth, why didn't we just write it that way? Well, it would have required us to rewrite the entire bylaw, and we just didn't want to put up that red flag, because our intent is not to really touch the living wage except for to exempt these students. And so what we did, student workers, and so what we did is we actually put a listing in there to protect others
I
who
saw
might.
that, and the reason I'm asking this, because I'm wondering, is that listing sufficient? Do we, in other words, the first time we did this, it turns out we made a mistake, and we gave living wage to some people who didn't. Now that we're tweaking it, I don't want to go the other direction and end up taking away living wage from some people who should be getting it.
Right,
I
and
agree
so-
with you that, my daughter's one of them, frankly. She's a junior lifeguard at the tank. And,
Right, so I'm going to let
and,
Lisa.
she doesn't deserve, she doesn't need to get that, she deserves it, but she doesn't need to get that.
So I'm going to let both
the
of
living
these
wage,
two discuss this, but we really have looked hard and long at this, and there is not going to be a ripple effect, but
So So two things. When I did a snapshot of our current payroll, okay, and we were telling you there are currently 31 employees in rec who are temporary jobs, who are less than 6 months in service. We should just note that does swell in the summer, so that number changes a little in the summer. The other people that were exempt, we had some of the graduate students in the health department, which you know we have those every year. It's a wonderful program. We have some people in Council on Aging who are working under the elder grants. They were exempted. And then we have our junior library pages who are currently included in the bylaw, which we should mention the same arguments that we're making about these junior positions were the arguments that were made for exempting the junior library pages, same reasons. Compression, ripple effect, you know, average age, first job, high school students. The other thing is that we did, and Attorney Connors was nice enough to, you know, to spend some time with us on the phone. We talked about her concerns. We told her what we were trying to do. And, you know, she made a specific request that we put in job titles because we had, you know, temporary recreation employees covered under the revolving fund. And she asked that we add those job titles. And we said, well, you know, if recreation creates this great new program, you know, and we're going to have some junior positions there, they won't be included. And, you know, her feeling was that we could always come back and include them. So we've tried to be inclusive of what we know exists right now in the junior positions in rec. So this was a request that she made that we agreed to do.
Okay.
Selectman Daley?
I think what Selectman Goldstein's concern is, though, so under F, on the revised language in the bylaw, you've named a bunch of positions, so I think we can all get that. But to go back to A, where you're adding, where it says seasonal and you're adding or temporary employees, so you're suggesting that many of the people we think of as seasonal employees, like people who might work in the parks for the summer, are really temporary employees. We've been saying seasonal, but that's wrong.
We're going to be using seasonal as only the definition of people that have been approved by the state to be exempt from unemployment. And right now, there's a very small group of people, and those positions are actually paid more than the living wage, so.
Okay. All right.
Selectman Franco?
So you framed this discussion in terms of the impact on programming and the cost of providing programming. I'm wondering what the real dollar cost to us is, what the premium we pay for having this bylaw in place as it's currently written. Phrased a different way, what would we save if the proposal were to pass today and tomorrow we could implement a new pay structure for the employees impacted?
Right, well, it's not necessarily a savings, but it would mean that we would not have to increase our fees to capture $40,000 more in the next year. So it's about a $40,000 a year cost.
And would we be creating a situation where two employees doing the exact same job would be paid substantially different wages should this pass? So would you have a high school student who's paid $10 an hour and somebody who's 35 being paid $15 or $16 an hour to do the exact same work?
No, as a matter of fact, I think that actually eliminates that. And I use the example of Selectman Goldstein's daughter, who is young and is making $13, $19 an hour, let's say right now. And she's,
No, I don't think she's
well,
qualifies for I think she's still at 10, so.
she will be soon. You know, she's been here for 6 months, she will be. So let's just say that she's here for 6 months, she automatically gets $13, $19. The person who's 24, 25 is a graduate student or has graduated and has not found a job yet, but still has 8 years of being a lifeguard, has been certified 7 times or 3 times over, and has a lot of experience, is making the same amount of money as a person who's just come in with less than 6 months experience. So it would enable us actually to be able to pay people different rates for the amount of experience that they have. And it actually, I think, enables us to also increase people, the minimum wage workers, incrementally based on merit and experience and skill and whether they show up, and you know, we have a wonderful mentoring program, especially if we're talking about lifeguards. But right now, if, you know, we give kids a lot of chances, and sometimes, you know, we wouldn't want to be able to pay them $13.19 an hour, and we shouldn't be paying them, but we have to right now, so.
You know, it occurs to me I should probably recuse myself. I know it's kind of silly. So I am gonna do that for the stated reasons, so I'm gonna take a step down.
I do want to say,
That it's a public hearing.
Yes, okay.
Selectman Daley, you take it over.
Yeah.
I do have some concerns about this. You know, the Understanding Brookline report came out, which underscored the amount of economic distress or even poverty in this community. And while there is not 100% overlap between the people who are experiencing that economic distress and the employees that would be impacted by this, there are situations where these part-time or these temporary jobs do provide some economic security to families. And at a cost of $40,000, I'm all for keeping people in town, and I think that in some cases, these jobs allow people to remain in this community and contribute.
Yeah, I'll say, though, the other side of that coin is we just heard that they're going to struggle this summer to get the kids who need financial assistance to go through the summer camp program with a lower grant than they usually get from Brookline Community Foundation. They're going to struggle as to how to help those kids. So that's the other side of the coin, yeah. And this is a public hearing. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak?
Hi, good evening, Patricia Connors. I just have some handouts to pass out to you, if I may.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I just want to make a correction. Someone said that I wrote the living wage bylaw. I actually was one of several people who are on the moderators committee for the living wage bylaw. So there were several people who collaborated on this bylaw. And I'd like to point out a couple of things. A couple of years ago, I came before you all with respect to getting the living wage bylaw publicized more on the town's website. And in that presentation, I mentioned that Senator Elizabeth Warren had just testified at a hearing in Washington concerning the federal minimum wage, that the minimum wage would be $22 an hour if it had kept up with productivity. So that was in 2013. Also, an interesting item that was in the New York Times just a couple of days ago is that McDonald's, that bastion of high wages, has will increase its wages to at least $1 over the local legal minimum wage for workers in restaurants under corporate control to an average of $9.90 an hour by July 1st, and that average will increase to more than $10 an hour in 2016. So interesting points of reference. I passed out a couple of pieces. One is the comments that I presented to the advisory committee last week in response to the petitioner's warrant. So you can go over those at your leisure. And what I'm also passing out tonight is my proposed changes to the bylaw based on the concerns that I've heard from the Recreation and Human Resources departments. This would be an amendment to the advisory committee's vote from last week. I don't know if you all received that, how the advisory committee voted last week. You didn't get that
No.
yet?
Did they vote?
No.
Okay. So how they voted was actually everything except what is stricken here.
We're looking at the one that says "to see if" at the top, that page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's.
So can I stop you just for a minute? Because you said you were trying to acknowledge the comments from the Human Resources and Recreation folks?
Yes.
And they just lectured us on the distinction between seasonal and temporary, which I think is exactly in the reverse of your edit.
Yeah, I don't go along with imposing additional definitions about temporary employees. My preference would be to specify the exact positions that the Recreation Department is concerned about. And they have said repeatedly, the concern is about the junior positions. Selectman Goldstein's daughter working as a junior lifeguard. And those are the positions I would be very comfortable with as saying, as being exempt from the living wage rate. And I included in there an additional one, the junior raft dance worker, because they had spoken about people, teenagers working at the raft dances, you know, and doing that for 6 months and then getting the living wage rate after 6 months. So I feel comfortable with having those junior rec positions exempted from the living wage rate. With respect to their other changes, I think we don't know the consequences. We don't know which other departments would be impacted by those, how many employees in other departments would be impacted. It's very unclear to me. The other thought I had was that instead of trying to reduce costs by going after the lowest wage employees, that another way to look at it would be to take 5% off the projected wages of our top wage earners in the town. So for the town administrator, the projected 2016 wage is $185,421. 5% of
You know
that.
what, this is way outside the scope of this warrant article, so I think we get your idea, but I don't think.
Well, I just have a few more positions that I'd like to look at.
Come on, let's.
We're not discussing
the warrant
anything
article.
other than the temporary employees who are under age 21.
Well, we're trying to talk about how to save money.
No, we're talking about a
by
warrant
reducing the
article
wages of the
with a
lowest
scope.
paid town employees.
We're talking about a scope of the warrant article, not the scope of the bylaw.
The warrant article deals with reducing the wages of low-paid employees.
Under age 21.
It's very relevant.
Under age
Selectmen do it.
21.
Well, no, it doesn't. It includes temporary employees. The proposed change includes temporary employees.
I'm just suggesting
so it
another
doesn't-
tact.
Yeah,
The
okay.
Human Resources Director makes $122,174.
That is not in the scope of this warrant
5% of
article.
that would be $6,108.
Okay, if you're going to talk about stuff that's not in the warrant article, we'll move on.
Thank you very much.
I do have a question for you, though. I think when we first passed this, I would have thought that seasonal employees count, if you hired somebody to work in a park for a couple of months in the summer, I would have thought that was counted under seasonal employees. Was that not your impression when we passed the original language?
The original language, John Dunlap, the former Human Resources Director, worked extremely closely with the Moderators Committee at that time to develop this language. the language of seasonal employees who work less than 6 months in any 12-month cycle was a result from looking at the rec department employment practices, that there would be people who would work 2 or 3 months in the spring, and then there would be people who would work 2 or 3 months in the fall, or some version of that. That you would see people who would be coming back year after year, doing those type of employment practices, you know, working those kinds of hours. We threw this around. It was one of the most intensely debated portion of the living wage bylaw, and the conclusion that John Dunlap, the personnel director at the time, agreed to was that, to be fair to those employees who came back and worked more than 2 3-month periods per year, that we should include them in the living wage.
Okay. Okay, does anyone have any questions for
Yeah,
Ms.
so,
Connors?
look, let me just, the fact base, is what we have here minus the strikeouts, what the advisory committee voted? No.
Well,
So we don't know what the.
This is your version. This is your version.
We don't.
I would suggest that you get the actual version from the advisory committee. That basically, the advisory committee adopted everything that the rec department wanted, with the exception of the minimum wage, which the minimum wage in Brookline is $1 more than the state minimum wage. The discussion amongst the moderator committee members.
The living wage, you mean?
No,
is-
the town minimum wage is $1 more than the state minimum wage.
Okay.
And that, at the time, the town was paying some of its employees less than the state minimum wage. We were shocked by that fact. A town as wealthy as Brookline paying some of its employees less than the state minimum wage. Everyone on the moderators committee was shocked by that. We decided that because the state minimum wage may be okay for other parts of the state, it may not be the most appropriate minimum wage in Brookline, which has one of the highest costs of living in the state. So there was a unanimous agreement that the state minimum wage should be, that the town minimum wage should be at $1 more than the state minimum wage, because the towns are exempt from needing to pay the state minimum wage. And we saw what happened with that. So that was the one thing that the advisory committee disagreed with the petitioners. They wanted to keep that $1 more than the state minimum wage. They voted in support of their other changes.
Okay.
So this would be my amendment of what the advisory committee voted.
Let me ask you, I have one more question.
Yeah.
They wanted to change to in any fiscal year, and you want to keep it any 12-month cycle, and they were saying that it's a big administrative burden for them to keep track of, because if everybody has their own 12-month cycle based on what day
Yeah.
they got hired, and they wanted to use fiscal year, why?
I have less of a concern about the fiscal year issue than the 6 consecutive months. So if you all wanted to say fiscal year, that would be okay. It's the 6 consecutive months that I take exception to because of what I just described, with some employees working 3 months here, then 3 months later on in the year, that particular set of circumstances.
Okay, so I understand. So you're saying if it said employees who work less than 6 months in a fiscal year, that would be okay?
fine
You
with
just
me.
don't like the
Yeah. And
consecutive.
I can understand that Leslie has done a tremendous amount of work with trying to keep straight the living wage and the town minimum wage. And I would just ask if there were some way that the IT department could help her keep track of these employees that are working 6 months, through the year. It seems as if there should be some kind of software available to the Human Resources Department that would help them with that, so it isn't such a tremendous burden.
Okay. Is there anyone else that wanted to speak on this warrant article? Did any of you ladies want to respond to anything we just heard from Ms. Connors?
One of the things I just wanted to point out is that we do know the impact of this because we've looked at it. And we have looked, even though Lisa is the one that this impacts most greatly, we have looked at the other departments, and there is no impact other than this. And part of what I would like to do, and what Dr. Jelenow and I did last year, is to start a mentoring program. And one of the things I want to look at is youth programming and expanding it. And so the cost of that is relevant. If we would have to pay the living wage is relevant to this conversation. So we have looked at the ripple effect of this, and there's none. I'm going to ask Lisa to speak to this a little bit, but with regard to the positions that we are talking with in recreation, we're only talking about entry-level positions, and that there's plenty of room for these employees to move up through the organization over the course of years.
I guess I'm still confused about why you want to add the temporary employees in there. I get why you want to switch to the fiscal year instead of the 12-month cycle. I get that, but...
Temporary employee is a misnomer. It's not an accurate term that we're using, with all due respect to Mr. Dunlap. I mean, seasonal. And so the temporary employee is the term that we use.
Seasonal is the term that's being misused.
Right.
Okay, so it's the temporary.
Temporary is the correct term. Right.
Well, I'm just going to ask you to think about whether you can perhaps be more specific. I think you can narrow this bylaw, what the change that you're suggesting could be less than, if you wanted to specify certain positions that you're really concerned about, that might alleviate some of Ms. Connor's concerns if you could specify certain positions. And I think that would be narrower than what has been proposed.
Another approach could be, can it say seasonal temporary employees in the recreation department, or no?
We won't put you on the spot to respond to that right now. I'm just asking you to think about.
Right, and we have done that, though, in F, in the section of F. And what I would say, though, in reference to Attorney Connor's comments earlier, from 2001 to 2015, the landscape of the staff, and specifically the staffing patterns that she spoke of, has changed dramatically. It is no longer like that here in Brookline, and those kinds of positions no longer really exist. And the people who would work in temporary positions anywhere near that get paid much higher, if not at living wage, then much higher than that. We have lots of those employees. They are not junior level employees. They are not anywhere in that classification that we specifically specified in F, but we are just trying to exempt those specific positions.
So when you're adding temporary, you're really meaning the people listed in F? Is that what you're saying?
Just I believe, what I would say is that F is a qualification of A.
Okay, but see, it's the way it's written, A is definitely broader than F. And that's what I think Ms. Connors is expressing concern over. And if you're saying you don't really need it, but I won't ask you to respond to that now. Just think about it, and maybe we can narrow that down to, some definition that everybody could be happier with.
If leaving the term seasonal, I was just trying to align the bylaw with our class and pay plan. If we got rid of the term temporary, we would just apply the 2001 understanding of the term seasonal. So I was just trying to clarify that by adding temporary, because that's how our class and pay plans read. So if we wanted to walk away from that temporary designation and just leave seasonal, we could continue to use
Or
that
I'm
incorrect,
saying-
imprecise term.
I'm saying maybe there could be some narrowing definition of, doesn't sound like you have many people in this category, so maybe it could be specified, and then we could not have the concern that, that Ms. Connors is correct. There used to be a number of employees that were here for years who were,
So I think there was a
kind of-
handful, and that was addressed. And we do not have those employees anymore.
yeah, so then, okay. All right.
I have one, I hope, last follow-up question, and that's back to my understanding, really just from the verbal narrative, not having read the language carefully. Why don't you put an age limit in? And that would clearly restrict the population who would be affected by this.
Because we would have had to rewrite the bylaw, and we didn't want to do that because we were not intending to trample on the living wage at all. We were just trying to create this exemption. And therefore, I go back to, if we need to pluck out the term temporary and leave seasonal, so that there's no perception that we're broadening it out to a wide group of people, that may be the appropriate fix.
Okay, and so temporary under age 21 doesn't help?
I mean, we could rewrite the whole thing, right?
Okay, but.
Temporary underpage.
To say
age
generally
21 is broader than the language
Then the
we see
language
here?
that's here, that makes no sense to me, just reading the words 1, 2, 3, 4. I cannot understand how you could call a limitation by age as broadening.
Yeah,
Because I think
it's
that would
not, it's
include
narrowing.
a lot more of our employees.
Temporary.
No, you're
Temporary.
If you're, in your
How many more
language now-
employees would be temporary employees under age 21, or even under age 19? Let's say 19. How many people are temporary under age 19?
If you say, right now, you're saying temporary are exempt, and if you say temporary under a certain age, that's obviously a subset of temporary.
We're not saying temporary is exempt. We're not saying temporary is
The
exempt.
town
We're saying
shall not, it's
temporary-
in exceptions.
We're saying temporary for more than 6 months.
Right, so it's seasonal or temporary employees under age whatever who work less than 6 months, blah, blah, blah. That's broader.
Or you could even specify if you have a particular job, like people who get hired to work in the parks for the summer or something, which is certainly what I thought seasonal meant before. So
right.
if you wanted to narrow this by saying temporary employees who work in the parks or something, that would be narrower than saying any temporary employee is accepted.
Just a last thought. A is very much labor intensive for the rec department. I have to admit, it's not me who does this, although I help them.
You mean the fiscal year versus 12-month cycle?
Monitoring whenever someone is hired. And one of the things that's important to know is that, this is great opportunities for these kids, and we have a lot of them that do more than one thing. They will work as a camp counselor, and then in the fall, they'll be a referee for a couple of weekends, and then they might be a skate guard during the skating season. And I shouldn't say season. That's how we meant seasonal before.
Okay.
And so the burden of tracking this is enormous. And we actually really discussed a lot whether we wanted to try to just, ask that this be removed, this whole paragraph.
Okay, but I think we've heard
Because-
from Ms. Connors that she didn't have a big objection to switching to fiscal year instead of 12-month cycle, which you say is difficult to
And again,
monitor.
keeping that.
So,
that
okay, we
terminate-
get that part.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is, what I think the concern is that temporary employees seems to be broadening the category of people who are exempted, seasonal or temporary. And is there any way, if it really is not very many people from what you're telling us, is there some way to say well, it's temporary people who are under 21, or it's temporary people who work, you know,
In a department
in
or
a certain department or
function
in a certain job or something. Is there some way to narrow that so it doesn't seem to be opening? Now, you're telling me it's not opening up a big door to abuse, but I think there's a perception that it could be, or might be, or something. So we're just trying, what we're trying to ask you to think about is.
Right.
We're trying to help you get this passed.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So we could either just leave seasonal, or we could look at other language, which I'm not sure it makes sense for us to do this on our feet, rather than sitting down and looking at it.
Right, and I'm not asking you to rewrite that right now, just to think about that.
Let me just add that we got a letter from the Park and Recreation Commission saying they are in favor of passage of this warrant article. So, just for the record.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I don't know if Selectman, here he is.
Remind me not to leave you guys alone again. Article 9, extending at-large town meeting members, Ernest Fry.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ernie Fry, Precinct 7, sponsor of this petitioner for this warrant article. I certainly hope this discussion will be a lot easier than the last. This is a very simple change to the bylaws. And it's really directed at the people who move beyond being a town meeting member to those who will be representing the Commonwealth and higher office, representing Brookline at those levels, and who still reside in Brookline. It's restricted to those who are Brookline residents. And it could be at the federal level as well for senators or congressional representatives. It's created for them so that they can receive communications from the town about what's going on in the town of Brookline. I've had communication with one of the individuals who would be affected by this, and they stated that they do have access to information from the town, but it's really hard to somehow pick and choose and find out what it is. What's going on, and so they were very supportive of having this change go through. It will extend the town meeting membership of the at-large group to constitutional officers of the Commonwealth and senators and representatives who represent the Commonwealth. And that's really the bottom line of it. And I hope, I look forward to your questions and comments.
Questions or comments?
I'll simply say I placed a call to Representative Kennedy's office a couple of days ago, and I'm waiting to hear back to see if he has a position on this, if he wants us to save him from being on the town meeting list soon.
Live in Brookline?
He does.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
This would affect 2 current incumbents, as I understand it. The state treasurer.
That's true.
And our state rep. And our congressman.
Well,
Frank
Congressman is
Smisek, right?
already a town meeting member, as long as they live in Brookline.
Right.
The congressman or the state rep?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I misspoke. It's our congressman or treasurer, but our state rep is. And if our state senator who represented our district lived in Brookline, our state senator would be as
That's
well,
true.
correct?
And even, we have other representatives that do not live in Brookline that represent little pieces of Brookline.
Right.
If they happen to live in
Brookline is
Brookline.
multiply blessed with state representatives.
Yes, we are.
So, elected constitutional officers as defined in Chapter 32, 1 and 2,
Section 1, yeah.
Okay, so who does that include?
That includes the constitutional officers are
Okay.
the governor, lieutenant governor, members of the governor's council, state secretary, state treasurer, state auditor, and attorney general. And with respect to the governor's council, it's a matter of, there's only one. There would be a potential rep, whoever represented Brookline. And that is,
She lives
that's currently Marilyn Devaney.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, has anybody expressed a reason why not here? I'm curious. I don't see it.
I think I saw some
I don't see
emails
it, but
about
I'd like to hear it.
diluting.
Yeah, there was an
Town
email
meeting, town meeting.
from one town meeting member expressing the fact that there would be constitutional officers elected by folks from a broader area than Brookline, and they may be paying attention to that broader electorate or an electorate in another part of the state in making their town meeting decisions.
I've got to say,
know if I buy
if
that.
you were able to get, our congressman to town meeting, I would be happy to lobby him at that opportunity on various issues of importance to the town. So I would be delighted if it was successful.
Get them in and lock the doors.
That's right.
All right, well, I suppose I should ask for public comment and see. Ms. Farley?
Thank you. Regina Frawley from Precinct 16 and a representative to the Town Meeting Members Association from my precinct. In February, we had a board hearing of 19 town meeting members, and we discussed listserv. And initially, it was something I asked to be on the agenda because different citizen warrant article petitioners who are not town meeting members felt that they'd like to be, for the period of time that they have a warrant article before town meeting, they would like to be able to answer questions on the listserv. I thought that was reasonable, and I said I would bring it to the TMA board. I lost the vote. I was one of two who thought that was reasonable, and the 17 who did not. This led to the comments more than a vote about, some people felt, I was not one of them, that they didn't appreciate that non-town meeting members from the advisory committee were now able to be on the listserv. And many of you remember that was a controversial thing that took quite a while, a number of efforts to get people to open up the AC. Then Harry Friedman, who's an officer of the TMMA, said that he received a call from Deb Goldberg asking if there was a way she could be on the listserv. Everybody had already rejected everybody else or had actually complained about the advisory committee non-town meeting members, and now we were being asked to make an exception to the rule. There was a very lively and wide discussion about it. None of it was personal as far as any critique of anybody, I can assure you of that. It was all about whether this is the camel's nose under the tent. And keeping in mind that town meeting members are nothing more than representative voters. We represent our constituents because the town grew too great. Back in the day, they used to have anybody who wanted to show up who was a citizen and a voter could come to town meeting, and that became unmanageable. So we now have representative town meeting, and sometimes we're unmanageable, so I think, or hear. That said, it was unanimous by consensus, without one person supporting allowing anybody else on the listserv, that we not do it. So many of us were quite shocked that a president of our organization then went and filed this warrant article. So I want to put it on the record that the 19 members, which is a substantial number of the sitting TMMA board, did not approve of one person who happens to be a constitutional officer being on it, and that it now is open to any generic constitutional officer. We did not take a position on the generic article, but by reference and extension, if we weren't too happy with one person's position being on the listserv, who's no longer a town meeting member, and when the argument against having a warrant article petitioner not be on the listserv for any amount of time, the opponent said, let town meeting members be their surrogate, be their proxy. So if they want to find out what's going on, they can designate some town meeting member to be the one to carry the water for them back and forth. I say the same thing about this article. If somebody wants to stay in touch with what's going on the listserv, they should ask a particular friendly town meeting member who's willing to spend the time to carry that water. That does reflect the attitude and principle of the TMMA board in February. So I do want to go on the record that I oppose this very strongly.
Can I ask just, maybe this did or did not come up in your discussion?
Can I put the hearing thing on? I've had blocked ears.
Go ahead.
Okay, you're so much better.
So you said the discussion initially was about being allowed to participate on the listserv. And I guess my question is, if it was considered that town meeting members could keep a petitioner appraised, aware of, or let's say, put in to the listserv the argument for or against a particular warrant article. I understand that part. I guess the part that I'm not clear about, and I'm not sure I've decided how I feel about it, but supposing our congressman could hear the things that are particular interest to the residents of Brookline through periodically looking at the listserv. That would be an insight into our local priorities that is not available at this time. And I sort of wonder if there was any effort to sort of think that side of it through?
But that was the whole point of why they declined to allow the petitioner for even that period of time. The argument is the exact same argument. Let them find a surrogate who will then bring pertinent information to whomever is interested. And if it applies to somebody who's actually a citizen petitioner on a warrant article, and it was discussed extensively about allowing Treasurer Goldberg, who perfectly legitimate favored daughter of Brookline, but it was declined by the board. And the board is in the position of recommending who can be on the listserv. It's a TMNA
No, I do
listserv.
understand that. I just needed
But it
to
was the
hear
same
a little
argument.
more. Yeah,
It was
okay.
the same exact argument that, actually, I'm not going to name names or quote, but somebody said, how can somebody with such a portfolio as treasurer even have time for this? Let's save her from herself, was the quote. But it really was across the board that people didn't want any changes. Now, again, come this March, we raised the point of what happened in February, but we did not take on the new discussion of a proposed new article. So we didn't take a formal one, but if you go by extension and logic, we said no new people on it. That would kind of include the constitutional officers too, as a category. I am personally concerned about the camel's nose, because how about saying next time, let's let people who've served in town meeting for 20 years stay on the listserv so they can keep their fingers on this and still be very useful members of their neighborhood. I mean, where does it stop? It really, the same good arguments can be used for any category of citizens and residents within the town. And as you know, the one thing that's never happened is, and the whole listserv, essentially, majority has always said this, they don't even want it open to the public. And so it's not even on a read-only basis for the public. Some of us I actually had no trouble with that, but I was in the minority on that. So, and you win some and you lose some. So, have I answered your question, Selectman?
So it seems to me, you might want to put your earpiece on. I mean,
This is past my bedtime, too. Go ahead.
Mine too. I mean, it seems to me that the question of access to the TMMA listserv is a different issue than the warrant article, which is, actual voting rights and participation. And I posit for your consideration, Brookline Town Meeting is famous, some would say notorious, for entertaining warrant articles far beyond the confines of the town of Brookline, and sometimes with state implications, sometimes with national implications, sometimes with worldwide implications, and sometimes not even political, but completely social, such as spanking, for example. And I would think that having Joe Kennedy or Deb Goldberg, for that matter, not just aware of the issue because they're getting emails from town meeting member, but so involved that they actually have a vote on it, might actually go a long way to boosting the influence that we have and the import of some of the decisions that we make.
My response to that is we've had all of that, and there's a typical way that we have a typical way that town meeting has dealt with that. I've actually been, as you know, a very active participant at meetings for 15 years, and I can tell you it isn't out of the question for a congressman to show up at an informative meeting to learn about an issue. We've had so many other ways of getting that expertise, and the interest of that particular federal or state officer is demonstrated. Barney Frank used to be here once a month, attending the Board of Selectmen or talking to town officials. So it's the precedent is they don't need to be on the listserv. They don't need to have a vote in town meeting. They just need to bring whatever town meeting wishes to them to use whatever clout at that level of government they can bring to bear. They're to be responsive to us. But this is really a local issue for voting. We are only an extension of the public, and it should be everyone who lives in Brookline as we represent, and I'll be happy to carry some of the water for Deb Goldberg. I just don't think that once you're not in town meeting that you should be having a vote and sitting in town meeting.
Thank you. Selectman Daley, I'm going to hand the meeting back to you again as chair. I've got an appointment down at the advisory committee for a moment, so
Okay.
excuse me.
Am I done?
Yes, thank you. Did anyone else want to speak on this article? Any rebuttal, Mr. Fry?
Thank you, Selectman Daley. Yeah, just a minor correction. Deb Goldberg is indeed still a town meeting member, and will be until the
May
elections.
5th.
But regarding the proposal that Ms. Frawley brought before the TMMA, and for the record, I am president of the TMMA, and as she correctly stated, the TMMA has not made any vote pro or con regarding this warrant article. I thought that her proposal regarding the petitioners had a lot of merit, and I was disappointed that that issue did not go through. We're a democratic process, and most of the people did not agree with that proposal, so it failed. Regarding the discussion of Ms. Goldberg's request to be on the listserv, I enjoyed that discussion amongst the TMMA very much, and the binding argument, the deciding argument, at least as far as I was concerned, was the purpose of the listserv is to provide information to people who are preparing for town meeting. And as Ms. Goldberg was not going to be a town meeting member after May, then, she would no longer have access to the listserv. It sounded like a very solid argument as far as I was concerned. And I guess that was really what really brought this about. Somebody suggested to me that, maybe we could expand the definition of the at-large members of the town meeting, and therefore, that's where this came from. And it seems like a very simple change to me, and I hope that you agree.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think since it's the same petitioners, I'm going to ask Clinton Richmond and Jane Gilman to tell us about 13 and 14. You can tell us about both of them?
Quick question, are you going to vote on this tonight?
No, I
Or
don't
can I
think
go
so.
home to sleep?
Yes, you may go home.
Thank
Go
you.
home. Is that your water bottle in your hand, Mr. Richmond? No, Mr. Richmond's coming up with his water bottle.
His plastic water bottle.
I
Yeah.
think he's going to use it as
It's a visual aid.
visual aid.
So I don't know if you heard me, but I said we'd like to hear about 13 and 14, since they're sort of related and it's the same petitioners.
I'd like to talk to you about them.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Clint Richmond, town meeting member from Precinct 6, co-chair of the Green Caucus, but not speaking for the Green Caucus. I'm also serve on, of course, on the fantabulous Solid Waste Advisory Committee, which will be weighing in on this on Thursday. So Janie and I are bringing a pair of articles related to drinking water access. The first one is what could possibly be the shortest ever bylaw, maybe in the history of Brookline. It's all of 2 sentences, and the second sentence is actually optional, in that establishments may charge for the service of providing of tap water, because, of course, they're allowed to do that now. But this reinforces that in case there was any confusion that this was meant to deprive them of profits that they might make on selling bottled water as a beverage. So that's the first one. And then the second one, or do you want to take them in order, or do you want me to sort of talk about them together? Because they're somewhat intertwined.
Yeah, I think you can talk about them together.
All right, so.
It's getting late.
When we had discussed, we've been discussing the issue of bottled water for a while and following developments around the country. As you know, there have been colleges, college campuses, national parks, a large number actually of cities, large cities in Canada with similar municipal bans to what we're proposing here in Brookline. And recently there was one in San Francisco, which was the first one in the United States. And our bylaw is modeled closely on the San Francisco example. So when we were talking about bottled water as an issue, some of my colleagues in the Green Caucus said, well, before we do anything around bottled water itself, we want to make sure that we have some tap water access, and one way to do that is to make sure that restaurants are providing water to their customers as well. So we expect that by itself will cut into bottled water sales, which, not hugely perhaps, but just it makes sure that option is available to our customers, and that we recognize and support our municipal water supply, which, is perhaps unequaled in the United States. Last year at the American, Waterworks Association, what it's called, Boston MWI Water won for best tasting water. So we know we have excellent water, but we want to make sure that there's access to it. And it's something of an equity issue, something of a human rights issue that I'm not going to dwell on. You've probably received some material about that anyway, and other speakers may talk about it. So that we saw as a prerequisite, although they're completely independent, one could pass without the other, but that 13 was really a prerequisite for 14 or any kind of action at all around bottled water. As we were discussing it at the advisory subcommittee, the sense was, and you'll hear from other people, that, that most common victualers were already providing tap water, especially fine dining and that sort of thing. But this is really meant to address more fast food places like sub shops or chain stores where they might, make it difficult to access tap water because they think it's part of their bottom line to provide, to get you to buy packaged beverages. So anyway, that one probably won't be too dramatic, except symbolically in the sense that this is the first such law in the country that would require victualers to provide tap water. So it would be groundbreaking if that's of interest. Anyway, so then moving on to Article 14. It takes three steps within things that are totally within the control of town government, because it's all about town property. So the first one is to limit the unnecessary use of town funds to purchase bottled water, mainly for general office use. We did have some meetings with town council and so forth and reviewed the language. I accepted all the suggestions that were made by town council. They were fabulous to work with and had read things very carefully. There were various meetings of the town department heads in terms of preparation for this. But as you'll hear, there have been further concerns you'll hear from the various departments. But so based on San Francisco responded, we were hoping to concerns that were raised at the time of the article's drafting. So there's that. Let me see, I'm going to go through the pieces here. This is a little slightly complex, but limits bottled water at large public events that are permitted. These are events that have more than 100 participants. So it does not affect like Little League games or things like that. The third area is limits the sale of bottled water on town properties, and that does not, there was some ambiguity about whether that included cafes that were on town sidewalks. We've said that was not our intent, and that will be waived, so we'll have some modification to the language to that effect. But the other two categories are food trucks, of which we're now down to 2, as I understand, and restaurants that operate or vendors that operate on town property. So that would be like Vine Ripe Grill or Cuckoo's Cafe. I know Cuckoo's has bottled water that they sell, even though there's a water fountain within distance of Cuckoo's. So there's a certain class of commercial entities that would be affected, but they'll still be able to sell bottled water in other sizes or other containers. So I brought this as the visual aid because we hear a lot about kind of the advertising around water, sort of the mystique of water. I don't know if I might come to my visual aid here. Pardon me. My other visual aid that I showed at the, as you know, we just did this at the advisory committee. This is a recent Boston Sunday Globe advertising supplement for Fiji water. Fiji's 8,000 miles away. But it's Earth's finest water, so you want to buy it anyway. And they recommend that you buy it in the water aisle of your supermarket, an aisle that did not exist when many of us were younger, let's put it that way. So, so they talk a lot about the water and the tropical flowers, the deer, or whatever that sort of are festooned around the bottled water ads, but it's the bottle itself that we've learned, and this is why it's a concern, I think, from a health standpoint as well, that this is made up of multiple materials. There's a polyethylene cap, there's a PET bottle, and these are not pure substances. These are synthetic substances that are made in factories where you probably don't want to work or your family to be working in. And there's a wide range of chemicals, some of which I mentioned in the article explanation, like that you probably never heard of before, benzophenone, an ultraviolet blocker, so that the sun doesn't get in here and cause things to happen inside the bottle. There are plasticizers, not always phthalates, I want to correct that, but some are not phthalates. But phthalates, when they're used, are very bad because they're endocrine disruptors, which have powerful biological effects. So these bottles are really the problem, and that's why the ordinance addresses only containers that are made out of plastic. So that's the main argument. The only other one that I'll mention, because again, putting my solid waste hat on, is that I also have updated data from the solid waste side that it's probably 100 billion bottles per year in America. And so that's the same number about as plastic bags, weirdly enough. So it's about one per person per day. So Brookline's generating 1 million of these a month. You might say, oh, I don't use bottled water that much. But somehow cumulatively, we're using 1 million. And as an affluent community, we're more likely to be using higher levels than, just the general population. So there's a lot of these bottles that are being generated. They're made of fossil fuels, just like polystyrene and plastic. The carbon footprint is very high for these because, of course, the water might be coming from Fiji, it's coming around a ship, then it's being delivered in a truck, it's being put into a plastic bottle, and then that bottle, something has to happen to that. So there's a huge carbon footprint to this compared to tap water. So we talk about that. So there's the sustainability issue of this. And finally, the recycling rate on these, while the industry will always talk about how it's 100% recyclable, the rate is only about 20%. And so that means 80% of these are being thrown away. And even the 20% that are recycled are downcycled into things like fleece. And we lose money on them, right? When we get reimbursed as a DPW department for our metal and our paper, we pay $10 a ton for this. That's a lot less than trash. It's about $90. Or maybe it went down. I guess now they're going to the landfills, 75 or something. But so it's still costing us money. So we're not. This is not a win for the town. So I think I'll close with that.
Okay. Do you have questions for the petitioner?
Yeah, I
wanted to hear
do.
from Dr. Balsam relatively
And,
quickly.
and my co-petitioner also would like the opportunity to speak when you're done with me.
I do have a couple of questions. On the access to tap water, Article 13, I did have a restaurateur ask me about this one who was, you're not meaning to say that they can only offer tap water?
No,
are
they
you?
can still continue to sell bottled water.
Okay.
And even this container.
Yeah, and they don't have to charge for the.
Nope.
Okay, he was. I always try to vote for the green stuff. I have some problems with this. I mean, why aren't the bottles the same for soda, and soda's bad for kids? And instead, you're saying, oh, if you want to have an event in our park, you've got to all have soda. I don't think that's really a good thing to be pushing. And we actually got a memo from Commissioner Papasturgeon saying of our over 117 parks, open space, school and town grounds, and small green open spaces, only 27 have drinking fountains. And I even remember when my kids were little and we used to go to the park, and they did have a working drinking fountain in those days, but sometimes it was pretty disgusting, and you didn't really want your children to be drinking out of it. So I don't know, I'm a little concerned about, this prohibition, and if there's, is there, okay, I get that you're concerned about the numbers of bottles of water, but is there something we could do between here and there that might reduce, like say, okay, you can only have larger bottles of water or something like that, so people would have to share.
Those still be allowed. So single-size serving would still be allowed at, say, the golf course. Larger size. If you had a 2-liter or a gallon or something, you could sell larger sizes. You could sell it in glass containers. There's been a lot of chit-chat between the town departments about what's allowed under the bylaw.
Is there a definition? Because it says no person may sell or distribute bottled water at an event
The
held on
definition of
town
bottled
property.
water earlier is
Is there?
in single serve, and it refers only to 1 liter or less in a plastic container.
Okay.
But I'm
Okay.
happy to answer the soda question. Bottled water was not invented to be a health solution for soda. And there's a lot of people who are working very hard on the soda issue. Many more people are working on the soda issue, starting with, I don't know, Michelle Obama, than are working on the bottled water problem. So,
But what I'm suggesting to you is if you're taking a group of kids or something to the park and you can't have bottled water, then you have to go for, I guess, fruit juice or soda.
well, I don't know, you're going to the park to play, or you're going for an event like Brookline Day?
Yeah, okay, well, let's say Brookline Day.
They could sell it in glass, they could sell it in a can.
Is it available
Yeah.
in glass?
I don't think we
I don't
want
think
glass
so.
in the
Can't
park,
imagine
though.
that that's more friendly from a carbon footprint point of view.
Well, plus the danger of breaking glass all over the places.
It's a sustainable material. There's no such thing as sustainable plastic.
I have a different question, and it's probably, to some extent, a Dr. Balsam question about health and hydration for athletes. I know that there are kids practicing. I watch them when I walk by fields where there are hundreds running and doing things that require hydration for their health, and there are no water fountains.
Are
And
these-
if there
are these
were,
permitted events?
stop, I want to finish. If there was one water fountain, it would not serve 400 kids, even close. So I'm very concerned about health and hydration matters, and I do not see kids carrying gallon glass bottles of water in their backpacks. So you really have to tell me how you solve that one, because otherwise I'm totally opposed to this prohibition.
Okay, so this is a permitted event, or are these just kids hanging out?
I'm talking about usually organized after-school athletics in a league.
Those would not be
Soccer,
affected because
lacrosse,
they're not permitted
baseball.
events. They don't need a permit from the town.
I make you a bet that the rec department gives permits to the,
High school, it's like high school sports?
it could be
Rec league sports.
rec league sports. Absolutely, they have
Brookline
permits.
Youth Baseball has
And there are bottled water vendors there?
No, there are kids with bottles of water
They can bring
there
bottles of water?
in their
They
backpacks.
can
You
bring-
just said
their
single
parents-
serves.
No, it's that that you wouldn't be allowed to sell bottled water at a permitted event.
All right, you can have bottled
Yeah, you
water.
can buy as much bottled water as you want at the grocery store.
But what about the distribute?
Distribute is the word I read. I mean, supposing the coach brings,
Yeah,
or the parent
case of water.
brings,
They can bring water.
Or the town league brings and
or,
provides.
yeah, right, the
That's
soccer
distribution.
league provides.
They're not selling it.
But they're distributing it.
Or distribute.
Let's see.
Sell
The
or
word distribute.
Let's see, which section are you on?
Ron.
8.35.2A. And B.
It refers to departments that issue permits for events on town property. No person may sell or distribute at an event. Well, there's still an exemption for if there's inadequate hydration, so that the Director of Public Health can waive it for an event that...
Okay, so there's one water fountain and 300 kids, and is
then
that
they
a
can say-
waivable?
Yeah, that's up to him.
Whose standards are we using?
Whichever
Director of
ones
Public
the,
Health has to
the-
go out and
the
see how many kids are in
director
line?
deems appropriate.
Do you have a list of events that this would apply to? I know you tossed around the 100-plus figure. I sort of, over the weekend, tried to come up with a list of events and was unable to, I think, come up with the exhaustive list. So I'm wondering if you've done the work to say this would apply to 35 events in town over the course of a year, or would apply to 350 events over the course
I don't
of
know,
a
I
year.
mean, the answer to that question, I don't have. The town departments will have to pool their knowledge about that. There are different departments that permit, and if, for example, they feel that because of the volume of the events of something, we could talk about adjusting possibly the schedule of the implementation of the bylaw. I mean, we're going to be flexible to a certain extent here to make it work. You'll hear more from what the subcommittee said, but, no, but the short answer is no.
Wondering if we
But,
could
you
hear
know,
from-
we're not as large as San Francisco where this event, where this is already.
Right, and San Francisco has a huge number of, a hugely large number of people available to enforce. I mean, either this is a farce that we cannot enforce because we don't have the resources and no way to pay for them, or I have to be convinced how you would implement it in a way that was safe, fair, and cost-effective.
So, Selectmen, it's 10:15, we still got other business. I know there are people we should hear from on this. We may have to continue this matter. I definitely want to hear from Dr. Balsam about the health aspects of this. I wonder if we could call on him right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Don't go too far, Glenn, we may need you still.
I'm here all night.
Thank you. I'm Alan Balsam, Public Health and Human Services. First, let me say that the Advisory Council on Public Health is meeting next Tuesday to conduct a public hearing on this matter, and because I value their input a lot, I'm going to just say that the remarks I'm going to make tonight are preliminary, and I reserve the right to be informed by their deliberations. On the other hand, I have ideas, and I talk to people that I respect, and so I do have some ideas here. First of all, let me say that as soon as these warrant articles were submitted, I convened a rump session of town department heads and division heads who might be affected by this, which is basically, a lot. And I was struck by the fact that there was almost unanimous support for the goals of these warrant articles. If you think about the fact that the Commissioner of Public Works sits on the board of MWRA, there's no bigger exponent of municipal water than our Department of Public Works. From every single division or department that was there wants this to work. And that's really the rub. How do you make it work? So let me address a couple of issues. One is the health issue. Bottles, plastic bottles, are nasty. Everybody knows that. But by the way, as was pointed out, plastic bottles bottle lots of stuff. They bottle Coke and Pepsi and bottled water. So they're nasty, but they bottle a lot of nastier stuff than water. One of my concerns here is that in certain venues, like the PTO fairs that happen quite frequently, or the Little League games where the parents have little concessions and they sell stuff to the spectators, in those particular venues and similar venues, if the kids go and want to purchase something to drink and the drinking fountain's 150 yards away, I'm concerned that the unintended consequences could be that people will be drawn to buying sugar-laden beverages, and that's not a good thing. So that's one area of concern. The other area of concern, I don't want to overreach on the issue of the hazards. Look, there's nasty stuff in plastic bottles. Now, what is the effect on human health? We don't know. The science is not there yet. And I've spoken to a number of researchers who do research on this issue, and they said in animal models we have one thing, in human models we have something else. It's possible there could be negative human health effects. We don't know to what degree that might be. So I don't want to use public health to overreach on this issue. There may be plenty of reasons that we want to get rid of plastic bottles, but I'm not sure we want to focus on the health issues per se. The last thing I want to say is what I got from the meeting with the department and division heads was, we want this to succeed. We're concerned in its present form it won't succeed. The reasons it won't succeed have to do with the fact that the stakeholders have not been involved in this. There's been no process to involve people in this discussion. It has many moving parts that need to be considered, and if you want, and plus, there's no budget assigned to it. So if you want it to be successful, what Andy and other division and department heads have proposed, and I agree, maybe the best strategy is to convene something that we just did in the past year. A resolution was passed at town meeting about snow shoveling. And Nancy Daly headed a committee that Mel convened in order...
Mel headed the committee.
Hmm?
I think Mel headed the committee.
Well, I saw you at the head of the table, so I don't know what that was about, but Mel was an important member of the committee. And what we did is we deliberated over a period of months, and we came up with a warrant article that I think is got a lot of positive aspects to it. That's what I think people want to see. They want to see a process whereby all of these various things that you have brought up and that I've brought up and that other people will bring up can be considered, because the goal is for it to work. We don't want to fail. There's plenty of reasons to fail, but we don't want to do that. We want to have it to be comprehensive with an educational component. That's critical. We want it to have a capital component. That's critical. We want timelines, and we want people to be assigned responsibilities that are measurable. It shouldn't be Alan Balsam should decide whether this particular park has adequate hydration, and then he's just going to say, okay, use your bottled water because there's not enough hydration. That shouldn't be my responsibility, and it shouldn't be my department who makes those decisions. There should be a process where we come to an agreement with the stakeholders about all of those issues. So that's a long-winded way of saying that take whatever I say with a grain of salt, because it may change next Tuesday, but on the other hand, I think these are issues worth thinking about. The goal is for it to succeed.
And I'm just going to say that I am a great fan of MWRA water. I absolutely think if we had good public access to water, let's call it water points, whatever it is, might be just a tap you turn on and fill up your container. I would find this much easier to understand, but I also feel I would support absolutely Dr. Balsam's sense that this did not engage with the folks who would be charged with actually doing it. And I mean oversight and enforcement, and I believe those parties should have been directly involved and work out all of those things, anticipate some of the unintended consequences, and plan for them.
I just have a question for you, Dr. Balsam, and I know that, with all due respect to Commissioner Papasturgeon, who does extol the virtues of the MWRA water frequently, I have read that there is a correlation between fluoridated water. I hate to bring this out of this old
Communist
plot thing, yeah. But there is supposed to be a correlation between fluoridated water and hip fractures in older people in a community. And so I feel like there are some people who may actually have reason to not want to drink tap water.
Well, that's what I would say is fluoridation is one of the 10 most significant public health advances of the last 100 years. But having said that, when fluoridation was introduced, there were very few other sources of fluoride in the food and water supply. That's changed now. We have fluoride in toothpaste. We have fluoride fortified in certain foods. So I think it's fair to say that it's worth at least looking at whether the levels of fluoride in water might be a little too much. I think it's worth considering. The issue about hip fractures, what you have to consider there is that, yes, there are some correlational studies that indicate there may be elevated hip fractures, but that doesn't mean that that's cause and effect, and it could very well be due to different issues. And so this is the problem with trying to overreach on science. We want to follow the science. That's what the Advisory Council on Public Health is trying to do. In this particular case, we know bottled waters, bottles are nasty, but we don't want to ban them based on health effects unless they're demonstrable, because once we start overreaching on public health, our credibility is shot.
Okay, let's see if there's any more public comment, and then,
Well,
yes.
and I think our Recreation and Parks Department directors are here to perhaps comment on this as well.
Okay.
Oh, and Kara
Well, Ms.
Bruton?
Why don't you come forward and go first? Well, you can go first. Go ahead. We'll get you all in.
Okay, great, thanks. I'll be very quick.
Please.
My name is John Harris, town meeting member, Precinct 8, and also a member of the Green Caucus, although not speaking on behalf of the Green Caucus. The Green Caucus has not dealt with this issue yet. First, my feeling about warrant Article 13 is that in the explanation for the warrant article, the petitioner said tap water is already available at eating establishments, so we do not expect this change to have a large impact on the restaurants in town. And at the advisory committee, subcommittee meeting earlier today, they were unable to name any restaurants in town that did not serve water, tap water, if customers asked. And basically, I can remember 10, 12 years ago, probably, when it was, when there was a big push by the companies for bottled water, sometimes you'd get attitude from the waiter or waitress when you tried to say you just wanted tap. But that's a long time ago, and we're now in the era of Yelp and of other social media, where if a restaurant decides they're not going to do something that people want to do, like serve tap water, and for free, by the way, that will go out, and that will hurt significantly the business of the restaurant. So the point I'm making on Article 13 is that it's addressing a problem that just customer demand and customer feedback have already solved. And why add another law just to kind of weight us down with laws that have no effective purpose? So that's warrant Article 13. Warrant Article 14, I absolutely agree with the spirit of the warrant article. I think bottled water is foolish. I carry my own water, in this thing myself. It's a waste of money. It makes no sense at all. The problem I have with it is that in their consideration of data and of the world, I think they have artificially limited themselves to too much that really matters. Bottled water, by the figures I had, was 13 to 15% of the non-alcoholic single-serve bottle business, and I think you folks had a figure of 40 to 50%. So the point being that if bottled water is banned, if it's banned because the bottles, the plastic in the bottles are so bad, why are we excluding from 50% to 85% of the beverages that use these very same bottles? It just doesn't, it's not logically consistent. Also this afternoon there came up the issue of what they called substitution, that as we're saying with kids who want money burning a hole in your pocket, you're at a town event, you're going to spend money on something, and if you don't have the option of bottled water, you're going to buy bottled soda. It was said there won't be much substitution. Well, in the real world, there really will be. During most of my working life, I worked with developmentally disabled or mentally retarded folks, and basically, and with a working class staff that did direct care with these people, and nutritional education programs that we tried to run had very little impact. But I can remember distinctly when all of us, with all the advertising of soda, folks would come in the afternoon with a bottle of soda. And I remember distinctly when suddenly there was a change and they brought in bottles of water. And gee, is our educational component better? It wasn't that at all. What it was is the big companies were now advertising bottled water as a hip new product. So basically, there are huge numbers of people. The towns that tend to, the areas, the universities that tend to do these bans of only bottled water and not this other stuff, tend to be upper middle class towns. In Brookline, I'm guessing that you folks are all, certainly have bachelor's degrees, probably have advanced degrees, and I'm guessing the same would be true of town meeting, let's say. But that is not necessary. And so basically, when you read newspapers, you can make sense of the story about, this study said this is a dangerous thing or whatever. So you would change your eating habits or your drinking habits or your exercise habits based on good science, and you can judge between good science and bad science. Well, there are an awful lot of people in the Boston area, awful lot of people who come through Brookline and work in Brookline who cannot make that judgment. My clients certainly could not. And honestly, the working class staff at many programs, and just, they don't read this stuff. They watch TV, they catch the ads, they're very influenced by the ads, but they do not read epidemiological studies or whatever. So I was actually, on the third floor this afternoon, there is a soda machine, and there were, it used to be that when you had a soda machine, all of the slots were filled with either soda or diet soda. I was delighted to find that 1/4 of the slots on the machine on the third floor were bottled water. So there was that option. I'm saying it's all foolish. This is all foolish. Just bringing your own water makes a lot more sense, but a lot of people just won't do that. And there's the hipness factor of carrying this bottle due to the advertising, et cetera, et cetera. So, let's see, what else did I have? If we're talking solid waste and recycling, well, why are we not being consistent on this? The recycling that the ideal recycling is what would have been addressed with the bottle bill. But, and that did not pass. The expansion of the bottle bill did not pass, I mean. But that doesn't only affect bottled water, bottles. It also affects, for example, when I buy hard cider. You can recycle for your nickel, beer, but you can't recycle hard cider. So why are we making an exception in this case, for this one product? It just is not logical. Now, in terms of, in terms of the fossil fuel use, et cetera, the sustainability of single-use plastic containers, that issue as well. Why? Okay, if plastic containers are not sustainable, why is this Bill 14 saying it's okay if you put soda in the bottle, but it's not okay? We're going to ban it if there's only water in the bottle. It is not logical.
Mr. Harris, I appreciate your comments, and I hate to do this, but
Okay,
we do need to conclude. We're getting there.
Can I do 2 more sentences? Great, thank you.
Sentences, you're done.
One being the issue of bottled water not inspected like public water. Well, we hear from the petitioners this afternoon that 40% of the water put in bottles is from municipal sources anyway. So it gets that, and certainly when I lived in Northampton, the Coca-Cola plant, they had the option of putting water in the bottle and then either adding Coca-Cola syrup or not. So why is the distinction on that? And then finally, just the issue of mobile food vendors. These are people, who may be working at our events, and honestly, they have to make an honest buck. They want to make an honest buck. And frankly, with a lot of mobile food vendors, bottled water, if they can't sell that, it's bottled soda and it's, popcorn with fake butter. Bottled water is literally the best thing they have to sell. So why are we denying that honest source of income to those people? Of course, I have more, but thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Galantine?
Erin Galantine, Director of Parks and Open Space. You have a memo from the Department of Public Works, and the Commissioner also supports the recommendation for further research. But in the interest of brevity, there are many departments that play a role in either permitting or supporting events on town property. And we believe that it needs to be further vetted in terms of the user groups and what the impact will be and how we reach out to those folks and communicate implications of the bylaw, what the long and short-term capital costs are, and the operating costs as well as maintenance. And I will just leave it at that.
Thank you. Ms. Paradis, for the third time tonight, a record participation.
I've just been waiting to get back up here. Actually, I just wanted to be brief like Aaron and echo also Alan's comments about implementation and some of the other factors that would go into play for the Recreation Department. We do permit every single solitary field in town, and we permit to every user group, whether it's the high school, and it's just a different kind of permit. So everybody's a permitted user. At any given time, if you go past Downs Field in the Craft Oval, for instance, you will see a lot more than 100 kids on there at any given time. So there are implications of enforcement in that regard as well. I just wanted to briefly speak to the alternatives. And while there are alternatives out there for something like a Brookline Day for a vendor, we're looking at a case of glass bottle of water that retails or wholesales, or wherever we got that information from, at $49 for a case. That translates to, a significant cost for a Brookline Day patron who wants to buy, for instance, a single serving water. So there are some hefty factors. I would ask that this go to committee as well. And I do just want to say that both the Recreation Department and the Park and Rec Commission fully support the premise of this bylaw, and would like to, in the long run, enthusiastically and appropriately support this bylaw in the way that we can manage it, enforce it, and implement it wisely. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with something to add that we haven't considered already? Thank you. Ms. Bruton, I know you're here for something or other, but, okay. Thank you. Any further remarks from, or questions from Selectmen?
I'll ask Ms. Bruton a question.
Okay.
I note that there's a memo she authored in our binder related to Article 13, asking CV license holders whether they have any comments on this proposal. Have you received any feedback from CV license holders?
We have not. We did receive some concern from two vendors that are on town property that also happen to have CV licenses, but that's kind of a separate issue. So with regards to Article 13, we did do a mailing to all of the licensed CV holders. We also did an email blast like we did for the recycling article. Unlike the recycling article, we heard back from nobody about Article 13. And earlier in advisory, several people talked about just, going about their normal business, have not heard any negative feedback. Some confusion, like Nancy pointed out, are they going to make me do something weird? But when restaurants realize that it's just offering drinking water, there's been no concerns.
Thank you. Anything further, Selectmen? All right, my recommendation is we not take any action on this tonight, but I'll tell you where I'm leaning. I think 13 is a solution in search of a problem, and I think that Dr. Balsam's suggestion and staff's suggestion that 14 needs a real study is probably accurate from my point of view so far.
Yeah, and I would say, in spite of the comments this evening, what is, to me, a sort of a unifying theme, and that is everybody would love to figure out how to make something like this work. The warrant article does not do it. That's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you all for your input and participation, and we, just for the petitioners, it's possible we'll continue this hearing and ask you to come back to discuss this more before we're done. Thank you. Agenda item 11 is further review and possible reconsideration of Article 4 for the May 26, 2015 annual town meeting. Ms. Goff.
Hello. So just slight revision on Article 4 from last week. With the initial calculations, there was a ban for $650,000 that was not included for the Runkle School. So there is a revised amount for Part 2, I believe that's in the memo. The rest of the warrant article, the vote that you took last week is fine. It's just the revised amount of $10,442.
So I moved.
And just to explain kind of what happened there, so there was a timing issue with the school money that was coming in. So the town issued a ban until the school reimbursement came in. Once that money did come from MSBA, it was used to pay down the existing loan.
So I move that we reconsider our previous vote on warrant Article 4 for the May 26th annual town meeting. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
I vote aye. Any questions or comments from Ms. Goff or in general about the new information that we have on this? All right. in light of what we've just heard, then, I'm going to recommend the following vote on warrant article number 4, that we have no action on part 1 of the article, that we recommend favorable action on part 2 and 3 of the article as follows: that the remaining $10,442 bond authorization for improvements of the John D. Runkle School authorized under Article 4, Section 3, Item 58 of the 2009 special town meeting be reduced and rescinded, and that the remaining $388,366 bond authorization for improvements to the Heath School authorized under Article 9, Section 13, Item 68 of the 2011 annual town meeting be reduced and rescinded. Everybody clear on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Thank you. Finally, we have some boards and commission appointments to consider. I turn the chair over to Mr. Kleckner to make those motions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are 3 committees for consideration this evening. The first is the Cable Television Advisory Committee, which is a new committee incorporating prior committee responsibilities that were under former committees. We have 2 members to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen that are, and the 2 applicants that we have are Frank Caro
Aye.
and Melissa Trevitt.
Aye.
Okay. And then with the Climate Action Committee, there is a vacancy, and there's 1 applicant, Kathleen Scanlon.
Aye.
And then the Brookline Commission for Women, there are 2 vacancies. I would propose the vacancy for 2016 be filled with the single applicant, Jennifer Goldsmith.
Aye.
And that concludes our agenda for this evening, concludes our meeting for this evening. Thank you all for your attention and participation. See you next week.